Hey everybody, welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Assistant Professor in Communication and Media at Lund University. Remember, you can follow the show on Twitter at SMNP Podcast, or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org.
Those beautiful notes, right?
Yeah. So here we are for the 5th annual Social Media and Politics Year in Review with Dr. Anamaria Dutceac Segesten. She's an associate professor in the Department of Strategic Communication at Lund University. Congratulations on the promotion this year.
Thank you. Thank you. It hasn't been all bad 2020 after all.
No. And we will dive into everything that happened, or at least what we think is interesting, or what we can cram into these next 2 hours.
Max,
hopefully. On the 5th annual Year in Review. And I thought we would start by going back to the last Year in Review.
Yes.
Which, do you remember what happened?
No, actually, it seems like 2019 was about, in the 19th century.
Well,
that far ago.
We tried to live stream that, and it was a complete disaster.
Oh, yes.
One of the lights went out. Our audio input got corrupted, so we had to re-record.
Oh, yes, that's when you were already in another country.
I was back home in the US, and we re-recorded the episode on Zoom. Before Zoom was cool.
We were trending, yeah, totally.
So we were first adopters of Zoom. Little did we know how much that platform would come into our lives.
We should have bought a stock in Zoom.
I will get to that very shortly. But
because now those people who are like prescient enough probably are very rich individuals.
So I thought it was just funny. I had never used this platform before, or something that just came as part of Lund University's communications package.
Again, Lund University ahead of its game.
And so the platform has been around for a little while. I'll get into that in a second. Let me explain the format a bit for the listeners. If this is your first year in review. So it's a bit different from the other podcasts we do, in that this is going to be more informal. And the format is basically both Anamaria and I have picked out 3 GIFs for you, the listeners, that we will unwrap as we move through the episode. And previously, it was kind of like biggest trends in social media and politics in the past year. I think more it's just kind of like what we'd like to talk about, or interesting things to bring up.
A selection of important for us rather than important for absolutely everyone. Events or trends.
Yeah, things you should know about. And it's always fun, I think, to dig in. I'm always like, what am I going to talk about? And then you start getting into a topic and it just
you narrow it down. You start like 12 topics and then it has to be only 3. But again, if you have any comments that will address things that we didn't pick up, you can always just drop them in. And we already have received some questions ahead of time.
Yes, thank you for submitting questions ahead of time. Those of you who have, we'll definitely get to those.
And you can also submit as you listen to us speaking and maybe thinking, why don't they pick up this thing, which I thought was so important? So you can obviously intervene in the conversation.
Definitely. So this year, I think we did this one year before. We'll start with a couple stocking stuffers, which are mini GIFs.
Yes.
The first one has to do exactly with Zoom, which, we've all been accustomed to so
Some
far.
earlier than others.
Some earlier than others, yes. And what is Zoom, right? Like, where did this platform come from and why is it so successful?
It zoomed into our lives.
There it is. So Zoom was founded in 2013 as a video conferencing platform, but always had ambitions to do more. And I mean, it really filled its shoes this year. And so I was thinking, like, why Zoom? Like, why not Skype? Why not Microsoft Teams, which is now a heavy competitor to Zoom?
Yeah.
So I was digging around, and basically they have this freemium model, right, where you get 40 minutes, I believe it is, free, and then the rest you pay for. And this is obviously it's attractive in terms of cost. Most people just really enjoy that it's easy to use. I think it is quite
self-explanatory,
quite
almost.
easy to use. From a technical side, though, this is where things get interesting, is that they're really praised for their ability to keep latency below 150 milliseconds, over which conversations start to become unnatural. And so the way they do this is quite interesting, is that they don't optimize the connection for all devices, which means that they would have to sort of optimize for the lowest device. Yeah. They kind of cut the lowest device out. So if you think about the Zoom calls you've had, someone is kind of getting choppy, it doesn't bring down the whole connection.
Yeah.
You just kind of like let that person go, right? So it analyzes each device, each operating system, and tunes connections specifically for that device. So that's kind of where it had a bit of advantage. And whatever it is, it's latency or its ease of use, it exploded in the early months of the pandemic, as we all know. So they don't have too much figures that are released, but if we look at their daily downloads, January 2020, which is when
we began to have some...
I think we did the year in review a couple weeks before that.
Yeah.
56,000 daily downloads on Zoom.
56, nah, it's not really like mind-blowing.
February 2020, the next month, 1.7 million. And then,
oh my goodness.
And then March, going into the pandemic, 2.13 million. So you just see basically exponential growth.
From 56 to millions. My
Yes.
goodness.
And it's very hard to get a sense of their daily active users. And they really haven't released much numbers since early in the pandemic. So what we do know is that their peak daily meeting participants, this is not the same as a daily active user because you can be counted multiple times if you're in 5 meetings,
Yeah,
right?
which
So
happened.
December 2019, it was about 10 million daily meeting participants, up to in March, when the pandemic started, 200 million, and then April, 300 million. So we're looking at 20x growth on the platform.
Mind-blowing.
And just last couple things in terms of what does this mean for their revenue?
That's exactly my point earlier, an investment.
Yes, they were marked as a unicorn, I think in 2015. And so last year at this time, Zoom pulled in 2.2 million in profit. This year, it cleared 198 million in profit. So we're talking profit. Revenue was 777 million, and their stock price going from $65 at the start of the year to as high as $559 in October.
As I said.
So that's a bit about Zoom. And what's interesting is now the stock price has gone down to about 400 because
competition
and vaccine news is bad for Zoom. So kind of interesting to think about.
Which is a nice transition, I'd say, to what I was preparing as a stocking stuffer, which is a prequel in the sense for the real gifts coming up soon. But it's thinking out loud, what did the corona pandemic really mean for social media? And I'm going to look at social media in general and then maybe zoom in a little bit more specifically on the political consequence of this. But I think what we can see without any doubt is that for tech overall, this has been a leapfrogging year. Many experts that look at future studies and all this kind of projections were expecting us to be where we are today if we were to ask them last year in 2019, in 10 years from now. So by 2029, should we have reached this level of digitalization of everything? And we're thinking about online shopping, online banking, online teaching, online meeting, like pretty much everything that we have witnessed in our lives becoming moved to the online sector. So it's a 10-year pretty much leapfrogging effect. And that's quite amazing and impressive that it could be done.
Like it just accelerated because of the pandemic.
A lot of the stuff was there, like you were illustrating with Zoom, but this circumstance just accelerated those changes. And exactly the same word has been used to describe social media growth, accelerating, right? And that's very much the case for all the platforms, because small or big, they all have seen an increase of users. And I have some numbers here. I'm just gonna look at that just so that I have this right. Between July and September 2020, an average increase of 2 million users per day were added to social media. So 2 million new users per day. It's incredible in this 3-month period, July to September, which is the largest quarter-on-quarter increase in the history of monitoring social media. Also, like historical levels of overall social media participation. In October of 2020, we have overpassed 50% of the world population being connected to one or several social media channels, which is, again, mind-boggling.
This will come back as a theme later in the episode.
Yeah, I think this is the part that kind of blows everybody's hair back, right? And altogether, there's a 10% overall across platforms increase in users for social media in general. And that also correlates with increase in screen time. So now I have a question for you. how many hours, again, we're not in minutes, but hours, how many hours on average do you think is spent per day on social media content?
Ooh,
Guess.
across all age brackets.
This is a total average. We exclude lots of...
5.
5 hours? Well, then you're maybe too pessimistic. It's 2.5. 2.5 hours per day we expose ourselves to social media content, which is actually a little bit below TV content, which is 3.5 hours during the pandemic.
So overall 5.5 per looking at a screen.
Exactly. It's pretty crazy. And of course, this is difficult to separate because sometimes you watch television, but you've been prompted through social media.
Or you're doing both at the same time.
Or you do both, like the double screen or triple screen, I guess, at this point. But overall, you get the idea. It's an immense amount of time spent online. And we don't even talk about Zoom time, right?
Yeah.
This is extra, like the meetings and the online teaching for children all ages and working out via remote trainers and so on, right? So basically, the pandemic has meant an increased activity on the screen. We are glued to the screen, and that has interesting consequences, which I'm not going to go too much into.
I wonder what implication this has for eye doctors down the road.
That's a good point.
Boom in business. So if you're going into college now, go into
ophthalmology. Yes, if this trend will continue, which is another big futuristic thing, right? Will this trend continue? And both my natural instinct and the type of researcher that I was documenting before joining the podcast for this episode says that some of this will obviously go back to previous normality, but a lot will actually persist in the digital universe. So there will be a lot of regular classes, but there will be also periodic digital learning moments. The same with the online shopping. A lot of people will actually have educated themselves to prefer that and find advantages to that mode of operation. So I don't think we can tell that this will stop. And the same with social media, because social media platforms have seen there's ways to get all these people's attention. One more thing I'll say about the social media trends in general, which is that not all platforms are equal in terms of their growth, which is another theme that I'm going to return to through the episode. Some platforms have seen an immense spike. Everybody's thinking about TikTok, and you are right, TikTok, because it provides also the type of humoristic, entertaining content that kind of takes your mind off the pandemic woes, has been growing very much. Again, this has been hampered by different rules and regulations by governments wary of interference through TikTok by the Chinese government. So India and the United States have restricted the reach of TikTok, India banning it fully. So that deprived TikTok of a good chunk of their population. So if we don't look at TikTok, because the stats can be biased, I can report some numbers from some other platforms. And remarkably, Snapchat grew 9% on the latest quarter-on-quarter growth.
Back from the dead.
Yeah, people were like thinking, oh, nobody's going to care. No, 9% increase. And if we look December 2020 compared to December 2019, there's a 20% annual growth in registered users of Snapchat, which is really, really impressive, especially for a company that people were already thinking they should discount.
Yeah, and it gets to this idea that we have the big FTC battle with Facebook in terms of monopolies. I'm sure we'll get there later in the episode as well. But what happens when Evan Spiegel refuses the buyout by Facebook and was pushed down for a long time? Snapchat obviously could have been the next Instagram had Facebook bought into it, but it shows that even if companies refuse a Facebook buyout, they can still be competitive. It may take a few years to get back on their feet, but it seems like that's what Snapchat is doing.
It's doing very well, but on talking about Instagram is also doing very, very well. Very, very well. Much better than Facebook. If you think at the growth numbers, we have 7.1 quarter-on-quarter increase for Instagram, and Instagram is the platform that grows fastest and most significantly when it comes to the number of monthly new users added to the services, and it's clearly where everybody's kind of moving to. Yeah. Facebook, especially if everybody, we mean people that are between the age of 16 and 40. Yeah. So definitely up and coming, or stronger and stronger coming, Instagram. But also, interestingly, Twitter. Twitter has been growing.
Yeah, I think Trump has a lot to do with that. At least
It has been growing a while, but even in this pandemic year, in our pandemic moment, Twitter has seen an 8.9% growth in what they call reached audience. And this is a little bit of an issue with how to measure Twitter, because in order to access information on Twitter, you do not need an account. Right?
Yeah,
so they don't necessarily count in these 8.9% new registered users, but they count people that have accessed the platform without being registered users, because the trend has been to use Twitter simply as a news service, as a newspaper. So you don't know if you log into the New York Times or to any Swedish newspaper, you don't need to subscribe or identify yourself when you read those news. And the same attitude has been apparently transferred into Twitter.
Yeah, this can be heavy bot traffic, though. Anyone who has a website knows that most of your hits are coming from like bots that live on the internet. It's kind of crazy.
I'm pretty confident that this number tries to avoid those pitfalls, because that would be kind of false. I think there's an interesting practice in terms of having Twitter move in that news portal direction. Now, what does that mean for politics, right? Because that's the important question on this podcast. And the obvious answer is that since more people are joining social media and more people are glued to the screen hours and hours every day, politicians have all the incentives in the world to be there, to make an effort, to make a presence, and to adapt to different audiences that these platforms may have. So my trend spotting, if I am to exercise in my imagination in that field, would be there will be actually an increase in the campaigning and information by both governments and institutions and political parties and candidates on social media, because that's where the people are. It will take some time for physical rallies, physical campaigning to really go to where it used to be before the pandemic, if ever, really. So if we are to look at the United States presidential elections, Joe Biden won the election from his basement. I exaggerate, obviously, but it's to some extent true. He's been criticized. I was thinking to include some caricatures and so on, but I think to some extent it's true that he had town halls, interviews, campaign mobilization, pretty much anything you do in a physical shape, having guests over virtually, anything from Hillary Clinton to former U.S. Olympic medal holders and so on, coming in his basement and basically do a kind of a talk show.
Podcasting out of his basement. I know the feeling. What I found interesting is that the couple times that he did go out and he gave these kind of rallies with cars and honking the horn and stuff, very interesting to see the difference between the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign in terms of camera angles. So you had Dan Scavino showing these huge pans of the Trump, rallies, pulling in, 10,000 people. Whereas when Biden was out there campaigning, you may see 20 cars max out there, but only one camera angle. They never panned the audience. And that was kind of a weird contrast to see that they really kept
different
that
presentations.
When he was out of the basement, so to say, it was very tightly controlled in terms of what the
you
audience was allowed to see. And I don't think it would look good if they gave you the full pan type of thing.
Also, it's a different thing, like to see a parking lot of cars. It doesn't give you that vibe, right? I wouldn't be like excited, politically, inflamed.
It just reminded me of a drive-in movie, and Joe Biden's kind of old, so it's
That's a revival too. The drive-in movie has been definitely on like a dying art, and now it's coming back, or has been dying for some time, but now it seems to be picking up. So anyway, I think it's interesting to see this trend that more social media presence may lead to more e-campaigning. And final thought is that we actually do get to see, at least to some extent, Biden's basement. Right? And we have seen that with so many celebs, in particular musicians and artists that have entertained us in the tough months.
Skype room raider.
So many, like anyone, like from classical pianists and cello players to like Snoop Dogg, right? Everybody could show us what is it like in their own home. And that was also kind of an interesting anthropological observations, like how different people have it set up. And some people were very natural in their kitchen, and you could see that it wasn't
Here's
like
my book.
and some people were very like manicured in terms of what they wanted to showcase, and really developing the kind of studio. The newscasts were from individual studios, and just to make maybe a slightly mean comment, I remember reading on Twitter, like, now you see the importance of professional makeup artists because people now had to do their own hair, had to do their own makeup, had to fix their own sound and all that. And there was a learning curve there. But I think overall, at least in this aspect, the digital transition worked pretty nicely, and I'm quite sure we will see more of this than not a complete return to how things used to be.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what staying power all the zooming in and out has, blended models of learning and things like that, at least in our business. So before we get to the first gift, I think we should interject here a question, audience question from Tom, friend of the pod. 2020 has seen a lot of people locked in their houses and restricting their movements. Have we seen any trends arise, accelerate from this, or is it hard to draw a direct line? So I think that kind of tails on what you're talking about. And in terms of like societal questions, I mean, that's a big,
it's a
big thing.
Question,
I don't know. But I can, I was going to say this during a gift, but I can go ahead and say it now, which is, what are the implications of that on political campaigning, particularly advertising? And I dropped in, okay, I'm giving away my second gift, but I dropped into a kind of virtual online breakdown of the election from the Democratic National Committee, and they had a bunch of digital strategists on there talking about digital ads and their effectiveness in the last US election cycle. And so I was kind of keeping an eye or an ear out for what impact does coronavirus have. And there's a couple interesting things. And when you're crafting an ad, right, and I think we've seen this in terms of research from Erica Franklin Fowler and Travis Ridout, that when candidates are given the choice, basically, if they have unlimited resources, they'll choose to go to TV over Facebook. It depends how their media markets lined up. But to make a TV ad, or even a digital ad, you need a production team. And you can't get the production team to physically meet. So the implications that has is that in the last election cycle, there was a lot more of candidates talking direct to camera, because you have one person or just them holding their phone talking into it, versus having, as you said, hair and makeup person, camera people, editors in the different edit bay. I think if you're caught up to speed, Tom Cruise went ballistic on people being not socially distanced in his edit bay for Mission Impossible or whatever it was. So there's that, but there's also an interesting element that the campaigners were talking about, which is getting ads approved is a lot more difficult virtually, because you have to send a piece of copy, or the ad itself, to the sort of campaign manager, without necessarily having them look over your shoulder and be able to explain in real time, like, look, we're going to try this, or this isn't as big deal as you think. When it lands in someone's inbox and they're looking at it by themselves, it creates a pretty big barrier, according to these campaigners. So it actually works when you have people in the room, 100 people sort of, working on the same ad copy. It helps things get approved quicker. So what we've seen in this election cycle, because of Corona and people staying in their homes, is more direct-to-camera ads and more trouble for campaigners in terms of getting digital ads approved and getting it out there. And that's especially important if you're trying to fundraise off an event, for example. So I don't know about society at large, but that's what I would say for the impact on campaigning this election cycle.
And I already mentioned what I think is going to be a trend and has been a consequence of us being at home and glued to the screens, this increased use of digital information through the social media channels. And something I'll hint at a future gift, we see an increased participation of previously not very politically active age and demographics. Because the ease of participating digitally simply was there for them, since they were online anyway, in this kind of third space, as sometimes we will refer to, in line with Scott Wright's concept, right? I'm online, I'm doing things, but then this political thing happened. I am able to more easily engage with that subject. So there is an increase in the social media participation in politics by previously non-active groups. And we'll talk more about that in my second gift.
So many gifts.
So many gifts.
So those were the stocking stuffers. This always turns out to be quite a long episode.
Quite a long part because so much stuff is happening.
I can see in the stats that some troopers do make it to the end, but I don't know if they've fallen asleep or not. But the original idea is that you would be able to take this podcast on your flight wherever you were going, but maybe not
this year. And I think most people will try to avoid traveling, but not you.
No, I'm going to risk it. So if you don't get a podcast in your feed in January, coronavirus has smitten me down.
Oh, God, I have not.
Okay, gift one. Platform stats. This has become a staple of the year in review. I'm going to give you a quick overview in terms of what happened this year across different platforms with a particular eye on their political aspects. And I will say that these platform reports, year-end reports, are getting more difficult to find. If you type in year in review Facebook, the Google top searches is all about a feature they had 2018, your year in review.
Yeah.
Snapchat also has one, makes it very difficult. And if you type in year in review report, everything is about reporting content to the platform. So it's kind of going through many Google pages.
Like flagging,
yes.
basically, yes.
So I'm excited to say that we can talk about Facebook this year. Notably absent 2019. They did not produce a year in review report in 2019, but they did in
this year.
2020.
I'm very curious. We haven't really agreed, so for me, this is as much as a surprise as for you guys.
Yes. Now, I also have some meta-level comments about what platforms are doing with these year in review reports, but I'll save those a little bit.
Give us the
end.
facts.
The facts. Okay, so these are the Facebook basically presents its top themes, and this is something that all the platforms are doing. Instead of really reporting like what was the top this or the top that, it's more like what was the theme of the year. I think there's some strategic implications there. But Facebook identified 6 themes that defined the year, so to say. Top themes were identified by looking at the top 20 single-day moments of the year and identifying the themes across them. So a little bit of qual mixed methods.
Lots of research alerts here, but let's just hear what they identified anyway.
And I will preface this by saying the data reflects days from January 1st to October 31st.
Okay.
Which is quite conveniently before the election and Trump's claims of elections fraud.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. Again, you got to read into these reports a bit. So, what are the 6 themes they identified? The first one is icons, which is essentially a euphemism for famous people dying. We had the death of Kobe Bryant and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So obviously we all know on social media, when a celebrity dies, it becomes, people are discussing it. But
iconic.
Kobe Bryant was particularly big across all platforms. And obviously Ruth Bader Ginsburg as well, having huge implications for mobilization ahead of the 2020 election. So icons was one. Social awakening was another. Clearly focused on Black Lives Matter protests. We had COVID-19, obviously, as a theme.
Yeah, I was just going to say, can you avoid that?
Facebook live streams for fitness classes were up. And they also mentioned popular videos of people like coming together, clapping together on the balcony, right? We all remember those from the early days of the pandemic.
Yeah, those are the themes identified by Facebook as defining the moments of 2020?
These are like the top moments and cultural moments or something like that. Basically what they decide to talk about.
Highlight. Okay.
Environmental causes. $35 million were raised on Facebook for the Australian wildfires. That also happened this year.
Yeah, my God, 2020, the apocalyptic year, 2020.
Exactly. And other fundraisers for climate change activism. Faith and community, another good one. Over Easter and Passover week, it was the biggest use of group video calls on Messenger and the most Facebook live streams from spiritual pages ever on Facebook.
Which
and
is
Instagram.
Another thing that has got digitalized.
Man, and I can tell you, as we are live streaming now, you got to look up how to live stream and different technical questions. It's like dominated by the church-going folk. There's a lot of live streaming of church sermons. Yeah.
Well, again, because that's a typical congregation moment that now has been either limited or forbidden in some societies. So obviously, one goes digital.
Yes. And lastly, global politics. Interestingly, not phrased as politics or American politics.
Global.
Global politics. Kamala Harris VP announcement was most mentioned event in August, which is quite interesting.
Well, I think this has to do with her partly Indian American.
Yes, her firsts on so many fronts.
Yeah. But because India is such a large public on Facebook, that's what I mean. It kind of explains the numbers, because I think that mobilized a lot of people in India. They had a connection with this future at the time important figure in American politics. So I think that kind of explains the jump in popularity of that announcement.
Yes. Also on global politics, nearly all adult Americans were exposed to the Voting Information Center on Facebook and Instagram. Nearly all.
Yeah.
Providing information on how to vote and voting deadlines. So again, I'll save my comment for after. Interestingly, the US strike on Qasem Soleimani was the top 5 moment discussed all year out of these 20. So the sort of Iranian military general that was stricken down. So again,
the second dates, this year, or the first chronologically, because another one got stricken just recently. So Iranians are not doing well on that front.
No, definitely not. So I think it's really interesting, first, that they stopped their data collection before the election and all the claims around.
They did not stop their data collection. They stopped their data presentation.
Reporting, exactly. But what I think is interesting is that you can really tell, what are these year-end reports doing? They used to be, what is the most talked about, what is the most shared in terms of quantitative metrics. Now it's becoming a bit more interpretive, and you can definitely tell when you look at Facebook and Instagrams that they are using it to highlight the success of their products. So we can.
It's a marketing.
Yeah. So we can see that the Faith and Community Easter weekend being the biggest use of group video calls on Messenger, most Facebook live streams from churches, right? So these are becoming more of marketing opportunities rather than necessarily.
Which doesn't mean to say that they're wrong. I'm sure these were really very, very important in terms of the quantitative elements to it, but to present this over others because we don't have a quantitative factor to accompany that, it's a could be questionable, let's say.
Yes. So Kobe Bryant, he takes the cake for the most discussed moment overall. So Icons was the leading one.
And that was early, very early in the year. So it's quite interesting that it still kept that position.
I mean, it was huge. And we'll also see that on other platforms as well. Briefly, in terms of top pop culture moments, were things like Michael Jackson, Tiger King dominated across platforms. Show about, I don't know, some tigers and crazy people. It was popular.
Now that you mention it, yes.
No Ariana Grande or Selena Gomez featuring in on any platform this year, unfortunately. That's been a recurring battle.
Exactly.
That seems to be...
I was looking forward to this, but it has not made it to the top.
No, but I can see that Miss Grande is consistently among the top listen artists among people who stream this podcast on Spotify, as well as Taylor Swift, the Beatles, and Miley Cyrus. So congratulations.
Cool.
We do not have the same music interests, but maybe interests along other lines. Exactly. So that is the Facebook year in review. And actually, I'm not going to do Instagram because there was nothing really political happening.
Well, this is where you and I may have different takes on stuff. So we bring an element of surprise, both to you, I suppose, and to the audience of the podcast. So, yes, Twitter now.
Yes, Twitter. I'm just going to kind of run through it because I think, like a lot of research, we end up spending so much time talking about Twitter. But they do give a very, it still very much is, here's the top most retweeted and like things, which is interesting. So this, their report was called Spending 2020 Together on Twitter.
And I think they are really entitled to say that as well, because people were really, refreshing their feed and waiting for all sorts of news about Corona.
Doom scrolling.
Or about political events. So I think we did spend a lot of time together with Twitter this year.
So the winner for the most liked and retweeted tweet this year has nothing to do with chicken nuggets, but the passing of Chadwick Boseman, the Black Panther.
It fits with the icons.
It's the icons theme, exactly. So that had 7.6 million likes, 2.3 million retweets. We should note that the caveat is these are tweets that do not promise prizes in exchange for tweets and retweets, like that Japanese billionaire from a few years ago. So let's see, what else was top retweeted? Something with BTS?
Also, you think it's not political, but I will come and comment on this in just moments. So don't give up on listening, because there's something about BTS that can be actually very political.
I didn't even click play on this video. Another one was a caption of a chyron from Don Lemon saying that there are 2 deadly viruses killing Americans, COVID-19 and racism. That
was a very popular retweet.
That was one of the most retweeted. This video of a hand sock puppet eating cars, quarantine day 6 in the pandemic. I liked this personally. I thought it was hilarious. So it was like kind of, once lockdowns were starting, people doing these crazy videos to pass the time.
Which is a general trend. I think we know already from philosophy and so on, but it has been actually verified even in the digital age that constrains faster creativity. There's been a lot of creative effort put by both, confirmed established artists and regular people who either discover their humoristic sense or their musical talents or lots of things that they didn't know they had it in them, so to say, and could share this user-generated content very, very wildly. So I like that sock puppet. And it's a game that is very easy to play.
Yeah, that was so funny. And again, I think it was really kind of new it was like when the pandemic kicked off. So it was kind of like, what are we going to do? And here's this guy munching on cars as they move along. Okay. So, continuing moving down the list, this is great. This is interesting. So this was a tweet from the comedian Andy Milonakis when there was the SpaceX flight to the ISS, the International Space Station. And he wrote a tweet, "Congratulations to the astronauts that left Earth today. Good choice." I think this was right when the George Floyd protests started kicking off. And what's interesting about this tweet is it has no video, no photo. It was a text-only tweet that made it into the top list.
Tweets. Humor and sarcasm.
Yeah. Exactly. So most liked, again, the passing of Chadwick Boseman from his official account was most liked and retweeted, but also among them was Barack Obama's tribute to Kobe Bryant on Twitter. So again, fitting in with the theme of icons. Kamala Harris's video calling to congratulate Joe Biden, which is interesting because it happened, in November and made the top liked, which is kind of interesting to think about. And something that fits with the Christmas theme was Macaulay Culkin.
Oh my God, Home Alone.
Home Alone.
Again.
he tweets, "Hey guys, want to feel old? I'm 40. You're welcome."
Oh my God, he's 40.
That one bringing in 3.3 million likes.
Oh my goodness, yes, that does have that effect on one.
So interesting. I think we see the icons. We see a little bit more political than Facebook, which is kind of borne out by a lot.
I like the humor elements.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Humor still can be top like, even going back to the chicken nuggets, Wendy's nuggets guy. And if we look at the top most tweeted about people worldwide, we see Donald Trump, no surprise, Joe Biden, George Floyd, who didn't appear to be on Twitter, which is quite interesting. Kobe Bryant, Barack Obama.
I'm trying to allow you to see. I do not know who.
I can't see. I should have printed this out.
I normally wear glasses, so I cannot see this either.
Yeah, Narendra Modi. But I think what's interesting is that Kanye West makes it. And so what I wanted to say about this list is that it's filled with politicians. But does Kanye West count as a politician?
Yes, because he was a candidate, a presidential candidate.
The ballot with the birthday party.
So he's an activist, influencer, artist.
Yeah,
I guess.
So Elon Musk and Kamala Harris. So interesting. I don't know. I like this type of year in review where you get the top most.
Yeah.
And that's it. They had a lot of other stuff in terms of like most food emojis but we won't talk about that here.
The memes as well. I think they sometimes would have a special category. But I think I still, from this point of view and some other points of view that I'll drop into the pod later, I still like Twitter more than other platforms in terms of their transparency. And this is just another case in point. But yeah, year in review for the platforms. Any other platforms you're going to cover?
Yes, there's a few more. As the platforms get more and more multiplied, there are more and more.
Point that we will get back to at some point.
Yes, but I will say up front that, as I said, we won't do Instagram. There's was focused on memes. Not so much political, unless you'll correct me later. LinkedIn has nothing. YouTube decided to skip their yearly rewind video because it just didn't feel appropriate to them. Snapchat had something, but I went to look and I couldn't find it. Again, because it's about their year in review feature. It's really difficult to get to the actual report. Maybe they took it down. I couldn't find it. But the next platform that I'll talk about is Reddit.
Yeah.
Which actually has a very, very extensive year in review.
Another one that gets thumbs up.
And I won't.
Also in this,
I'll just pick out a few things from it because I already know we're this always takes longer than we plan it. But everything will be linked to in the show notes, so you don't have to go dig through the Google results to get it. But Reddit did a really cool thing. They had 2 year in review reports. One was their kind of metrics, and one was conversations with moderators. Which I've also tried to do in this podcast with R the Donald, because I think these moderators have some really interesting insight within their subreddit. So when it comes to Reddit, which did have something like a 44% year-on-year growth.
Apropos,
right?
Yeah, people are there.
And I think Reddit's like you said, I think for some other platforms, it was like 7 or 9%. Yeah. Reddit is a platform that is kind of under the radar, but once people kind of go there and realize what it's about, you can get very easily sucked into joining a community on Reddit and trying to get your upvotes. Yeah,
I think it's a sensitive community that is important and special to Reddit.
So in terms of COVID, right? COVID dominates all the platforms. 50.2 million mentions of COVID, COVID-19, or coronavirus across the platform. And there's an interesting story about the coronavirus subreddit.
There is a coronavirus subreddit.
There's a coronavirus subreddit, but in the beginning, there were 2 subreddits. There was r China flu and r coronavirus. And according to one of the moderators of that sub, they were moderating basically both of them.
Same people?
The same person was moderating it and said originally r China flu was the more strict sciencey one and r coronavirus was the memes.
Speculative, yeah.
And then they actually petitioned Reddit to switch the 2 so that the name of the virus was the one that they would be using for promoting science on the platform. So they decided as a mod team, so the mods of one and the other got together and they had what was called the swappening, where they swapped the subreddit's goals. So they didn't actually swap the content, but they basically rebranded it with some promotional help from Reddit and went from 250,000 subscribers to 800,000 for the coronavirus subreddit in one day.
Wow.
Just kind of interesting little slice of trivia.
And very interesting work that moderators do. So you can see the effect of moderation on such forum-like platforms.
Definitely. So moving outside of coronavirus, some things I thought were interesting. We had almost a 10,000 year-over-year activity increase in Black Lives Matter. Activity is measured as number of submissions plus comments, just so you know. And a 40% year-over-year activity increase in our politics. Unemployment had a almost 50,000% year-over-year increase in activity.
No.
So I wonder
Is that true?
Yes. So I wonder to what extent these increases in activity metrics can be seen as some type of public opinion pulse.
Interest measure, definitely. You can see that. Wow.
Yeah.
So sad too.
So sad.
Yeah.
And definitely, but I wonder,
a reflection.
Of course, we've got to be careful of using, social media metrics as a indicator of public opinion, but this does kind of reflect something.
Compute together with other indicators.
Interestingly, also, we know Reddit is a platform dominated by white males. So you see, some increase in Black Lives Matter, that could be trolls, right? But when you see our unemployment increase so much, okay, there's probably a small subreddit before, but I think these statistics are probably skewed towards young, middle-aged white males, and you can really hone in on what's happening to that demographic. Okay, clearly becoming unemployed in the U.S.
Unfortunately, I think it goes even beyond that demographic. So
of course,
they are also included.
Of course. So in terms of politics, most discussed election topics in our politics were, number 1, Supreme Court, number 2, COVID-19, mail-in voting, checking voter registration, and the Electoral College. There was also another report for UK politics, which was dominated by Brexit, COVID,
no
Boris
kidding.
Johnson, pretty standard. I thought something that was interesting was the subreddit Home Fitness.
I tell you, this is one of the things that keeps people glued to the screens.
Exactly.
But while moving.
And those were, this is kind of funny. So it was push-ups, resistance bands, pull-ups, jump rope, and then HIIT workouts, high-intensity interval training.
Yeah.
So some people are getting after it at home.
Yeah, because it's something that you can do on a small surface, but you still get to burn a lot of calories in HIIT training.
Yeah, you've been doing some HIIT training?
Yeah, well, I shall not disclose what I've been glued to the screen, but yeah, I've perused those hashtags myself across platforms. Want to, do something with your time off screen while on screen somehow.
Yes.
So,
okay, so we have two
that
more.
Reddit, that was a new one, right? On the.
I think so. We may have talked about it last year. Two more. I'm going to keep these short. One is Google. We always forget about Google.
Google is a very ambiguous because it's ubiquitous.
Exactly. So Google, if you remember last year, they always do the year in search. And so last year it was about heroes or sheroes.
Yeah.
This year it was called the search for why. So things like, why are there so many fires? Why are there protests? Again, this is not necessarily derived by most people searching why stuff, but their take on what they thought. It's interesting, though, what was actually searched for the word why, and I'll get to that in a second. But in terms of global top 5 searches on the platform, we had number 1, coronavirus.
Obviously.
Number 2, election results. Number 3, Kobe Bryant. Number 4, Zoom. Number 5, IPL.
What is IPL?
Indian Premier Cricket League. The Indian Premier League. So when you go global, obviously you capture that large
Kobe Bryant was such a global figure that it basically resonated
huge in China,
around
India,
the world. Yeah.
Right? So that's interesting, but and if you change it to the U.S., then election results become first and coronavirus second. But I was curious, like the search for why. What was the why? So if you look at actually what was the top why searches in the U.S., do you want to take a guess at number 1?
No, I simply I'm not fantasyful enough.
Why were chainsaws invented?
Wow.
Number 2, why is there a coin shortage? Number 3, why was George Floyd arrested? Number 4, why is Nevada taking so long? Number 5, why is TikTok getting banned? So if this was the year of why, I wonder why chainsaws was invented is number 1 most searched.
Yes, I would have never guessed in a million years, I have to say.
And then lastly, wrapping down, top 5 politicians searched in the U.S. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Boris Johnson, Pete Buttigieg, Mike Bloomberg. No Trump, interestingly. I don't know if
people know already who Trump is.
It could be, or did they not count Trump as a politician because he's in office?
No. That possibly cannot.
But he wasn't even in the top 10, really. He didn't feature much in these. He was the top most mentioned person on Twitter, but other than that.
I think you don't search for Trump. I think you already know.
You have your opinions established?
You have your opinions established, and because he's getting to you, the news finds you, Trump finds you, you don't need to find him. So I don't think it's a very searched content for that. So that was Google search.
That was Google search.
Interesting.
And so wrapping it up, a year in review tradition is to look at the Pornhub stats, which are always very, very interesting.
They tell us a different story sometimes.
Yes, and they didn't actually do a year in review report this year, at least not at the time that we're taping, which is December 18th. But they did do a couple reports on the first presidential debate and the election week, and election day. So what I thought was interesting is if you look at the first debate, remember, this is the one when Trump and Biden were talking over each other. There was a lot of...
The most uncivil debate in the history of televised, at least, debates.
Exactly. And so what's really interesting about this is that... so they did have an election day report, but I didn't find too much interesting there, also because so many people early voted.
Yeah.
So you can't really draw a correlation between porn traffic there. But... when we look at porn traffic during the first presidential debate, we see a massive, massive drop. An 18.5% drop compared to daily averages at 9 p.m., which was when the debate started. And then a spike afterwards. So some people overcompensating for their time away from the Pornhub platform.
Wow, it's a very significant Yeah.
But when you break it down by battleground states
Yeah.
versus non-battleground states,
You could do that. Pornhub gives
They
you
do
that
it.
stat.
they find that battleground states, on average, had a 3% higher drop in traffic than non-battleground states.
Which means there was really an interest.
Political interest.
Yeah.
So you may be able to draw that to the fact that they were being bombarded by ads. Political interest
Also, I
was-
think
was
it's this
drummed up.
idea of like you're meaningful. Your vote is meaningful. So you cannot just like, cast it down the drain. It has to be, thoughtful, a thoughtful decision. I think this idea of responsibility
Yeah.
may have played a role in the increased political interest.
So I think just like with Reddit, even more so with Pornhub, you can get very interesting insights into data
Yeah.
with
And they're so transparent with the data. That was interesting.
So, and then the last thing I will say to wrap up this gift is that when it comes to the actual election week, they did a report on searches during the election week, and what they did is that they don't give you the top most search terms in each state. But what they give you is the most search terms relative to other states. So you're getting like the most
Within that,
the
like
highest
specific
proportion
for that.
for
yes.
that state relative to other states, right? And so they see Trump being the highest in Florida, which is interesting. Vote in DC, election in Delaware, a lot of other stuff that I won't read on air. But my favorite is that Mississippi's top most relative used term was the misspelling of porn as prawn. Fun fact. So that'll do it for the
Context matters. I
Yes.
think this is what we need to take into account.
Exactly. So that's it for the platform stats. Again, it gets longer and longer every year as there are more platforms, and that's not even with
All the
LinkedIn,
new ones.
Instagram, TikTok,
Gab,
Parler,
Parler,
blah, blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. So many. So
Telegram, yeah. Whew, just thinking about all this complexity. But we're trying to simplify here, even though it seems that we're actually not simplifying. We are, because 2020 has been a very rich year, both in terms of politics, as traditionally expected with some elections and the Brexit talks, and also because of the coronavirus and the uprising of everything that we used to have, we used to take for granted.
I think the most interesting thing for me is reading a bit beyond the reports and trying to think, what are these reports doing? And it's very clear from Facebook and Instagram that it's drumming up how many, they'll pick one point in the year when their product was successful, and then they'll shine a light on that and then connect it to some sort of, as it was, churches or people coming together over Thanksgiving or whatever it is. They'll try to say like, this is, look at what our
Meaningful.
platform does. And I think it's interesting to see, I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I just think it's an interesting marketing tool to use these year in review platforms as.
Yes, I think so. I think we would probably prefer, as scientists, more transparency in these numbers, but that's a call we make very often, I think. So this is just another opportunity to reiterate that desire to know more about the numbers behind these statements. Mm-hmm. But that being done, what's next on the schedule?
Next is your gift, your first gift.
Am I ready? Am I ready to talk about my first gift? And my first gift ties into the platform reports to some extent, because it's something that defines the social media engagement that I was referring to earlier, and that is activism. So I will present just some numbers again, and afterwards a brief interpretation of what these numbers mean. And one of the interesting numbers that emerges from research done particularly in the United States, as a lot of these social media research actually is, and connecting a little bit to Tom's first question, is the effect of social media on persuasion. Mm-hmm. According to Pew, 23% of users in the United States say that social media led them to change their views on
23%.
23%. They were persuaded to change opinion, which I think is so huge. One of the issues that apparently was very affected by this swing was racism and Black Lives Matter. But there were some other issues that were relevant for politics and that social media affected in some way. 23%, I think, is a huge percentage.
Now,
especially since we're taking into account that political preferences tend to be quite stable. So it's difficult to swing.
I'm thinking about some of these year in review reports, especially around climate. I think climate, so we had, on the one hand, I think the big issues this year in terms of activism and social justice were Black Lives Matter, obviously, and then also climate with, I think we almost forget that that Australia was burning, California was burning for a long time. And so I wonder if that's baked into those stats a bit.
It wasn't disentangled too very much, but definitely it had to do with trends specifically to the United States, though. So again, that may be looking differently in different societies. Another research that comes out of Tufts University in Massachusetts looks at social media as a source of information. And what they found looking at surveys is that, in particular for young Americans, political engagement is increased during the pandemic era. And that's where Instagram actually plays a role. If we compare September 2018 with May 2020, which obviously is May, and it's a lot of things that happened afterwards that even further propelled this interest upwards. The proportion of information about politics increased quite a lot in Instagram. It was 17% in September 2018, and it was 51% in May 2020.
This is percentage of political content on the platform or knowledge about politics?
The actual question is the percentage. This represents the percentage of young people ages 18 to 24 specifically who said they had seen information about election on respective digital platforms. So Instagram is number one. Twitter is number two with 50%, so almost even. Facebook, 48%. And then Snapchat, 31%. Reddit, 31%, and TikTok does not have comparative numbers from 2018, but 28% saw something political about the elections in TikTok. So I think that's actually quite interesting because the impression which you confirmed when thinking about Instagram is that it is a place for lots of things, culture, even commerce, but not for politics. And for a section of a population, Instagram is actually about politics. And that research that I referred to, again, coming from a program called Circle at Tufts, goes deeper and analyzes which segments of the youth were mobilized. I will just say in summary that what was particularly significant for people that were previously unengaged with politics, that they felt empowered to express an opinion on Instagram. So not only were they consuming this information, like these numbers that I quoted refer to, but also that they themselves felt that they could comment in a way that made sense to them. They felt empowered. They should do something about politics. They should mobilize, should express an opinion, should post an image in solidarity, for example, Black Lives Matter being a driver of that.
Yeah, it makes you think. I'm thinking about participatory versus deliberative democracy. Right. And there was a lot of talk about, when Trump got elected, it would be like, there will be PhDs for the rest of the century talking about, trying to explain Trump's victory. And I wonder if this election is also part of that phenomenon, right? This was a Joe Biden candidate campaigning largely in the basement, as they talked about.
Yeah.
Essentially a political establishment pick. And I wonder to what extent these trends are A, a result of coronavirus, B, a result of Trump, C, a result of all the protests that were going on. Yeah. It's almost a superstorm of participation. And we saw that with an unprecedentedly high voter turnout. So
that's activism, and that's specifically for the US. But there's a lot more information that everyone has talked about in terms of the Black Lives Matter. And I thought that I wanted to bring to the podcast a slightly different perspective. So while still talking about activism, I wanted to move to some other contexts. And one maybe important context is Belarus. I'm not sure how much interest the listeners of the podcast currently have, but they should maybe pay more attention to what's happening in Belarus as a case of social media supported activism. In August of this year, there was an election that was entirely rigged. Everybody is in agreement that Lukashenko, the dictator of the country for the past 25 years or so, claimed to be the winner when in fact the winner was the opposition representative, a teacher, a 39 or 37 or 39 years old. Now I forgot exactly how old she is, but relatively young teacher called Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, please excuse my poor pronunciation, who apparently took home the popular vote. However, Lukashenko did not allow her to win. She was sent in exile in the neighboring Lithuania, and as a consequence, massive protests ensued. However, and that's the marker of this dictatorship, the protesters were met with extreme police violence. Really extreme is the word, torture. Nothing short but of torture. So there was a huge impetus to try to organize in some way to cheat the police so that you can still express your criticism towards the dictator, but also trying to survive, like not get beaten or even murdered, as this has been the case. So one important actor in this has been a social medium that is largely relegated to this secrecy or encrypted message platform, in that's Telegram. So Telegram has been the primary organizing platform for Belarus protests. So obviously that meant establishing meeting grounds, planning flash mobs, planning actions, choosing slogans, avoiding also the police, but also very interestingly, establishing parallel news channel. Let me just check again my numbers. We look at a channel which is called Nekta, if in my pronunciation, that has currently, if my numbers are correct, 2.1 million subscribers in a country with about 9.4 million people.
This is subscribers to what?
To the news channel that is a Telegram news channel.
Within Telegram, okay.
So Telegram is organized in channels.
So it's 1/5 of the country, essentially.
Yes, it's huge. It's really like this, the unofficial television where people put their own documentation of police abuse, of platform for change proposals, politician statements, international support. Basically, everything that is important to know happens through Nekta. They have a live channel, so obviously sending and trying to document police brutality and the regime abuse, but also like a more typical TV channel. And there's a third Telegram channel called Belarus of the Brain. And all of these have been essential in mobilizing people, informing people, and keeping the protests going, which is amazing in a country that has not a tradition of popular uprising. Since the August election, there has been everyday massive protests despite amazing police brutality. And despite receiving quite moderate support signals from outside, including from the European Union, right? So these protesters really were decided that they're going to do something about it, and Telegram was the medium they chose to get this information and mobilization going.
I remember seeing something about these protests where protesters they're dividing up into groups in different quadrants of the city. And I forget the exact reason for that. Obviously, to spread the police resources around, but I think it also had something to do with the networks shutting down.
I don't remember exactly the story.
They couldn't kind of block them, but could be wrong on that.
But it is definitely signifying the power of social media in promoting democracy. So, of course, we've been criticizing social media for many things, including the rise of radical forces. But in the case of contexts where democracy is lacking, like Belarus, this is definitely a force. And I just want to say as a side fact that the main or the expected opponent for Mr. Lukashenko was Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's husband, who was promptly arrested before the electoral campaign started. And he was known to be an oppositional figure because he started a YouTube channel way back in 2015 or maybe even earlier, where he criticized the regime. And the founder of the Telegram channel Nekta was also a blogger and YouTuber who is living currently in Poland in exile.
So there's the activism connection.
Is there an activist? I mean, if you wanted to oppose the regime, you had basically to embrace alternative news channels like YouTube and like Telegram. And I will wrap up my global perspective of activism by moving yet again, switching continents, and moving all the way to Asia, and more specifically to Thailand. And the interesting part here, especially in light of what you were saying before about being BTS being one of the most shared band or public personality on Twitter, is that in a very surprising move, I would say, K-pop plays a role in Thai politics. Did you expect that?
I mean, I don't know. They're all over the place.
Well, I personally did not expect this because
I have no idea what K-pop is. I know it's Korean pop, but
it's a certain kind of music that has a lot of fans, obviously, in Thailand. And you think, what has that to do with politics whatsoever? Well, the K-pop fans are known to be very well organized. They have networks that cooperate nationally and internationally. And what happened in Thailand is that there's a long context. I'm not going to describe it too much, but there's been quite an uprising against the corruption of the government in power and the privileges that the royal house has legally.
Yeah, it's a new king, I think.
It's not really a new king. He's an older king, but his grip on power has increasingly
he's making more and more power grabs.
Exactly.
And I heard something on The Economist about it, that he's trying to de-link the monarchy's wealth from being linked to the people, to basically consolidating that wealth to his own
basically
name.
To criticize the king is a lèse-majesté crime, which means that it can even lead to capital punishment or life imprisonment, something extreme. Anyway, so there's a larger context of particularly connected to anti-corruption protests, but also anti-monarchy protests and pro-democracy protests in Thailand. The interesting part and the connection to social media is that Twitter was the platform in which these young, particular students, young, particular female students, started the social movement that still goes on as we speak. A K-pop fan, member of a K-pop network of fans, started a donation campaign on Twitter using the same channels that they normally K-pop fans use to build special billboards to honor their inspiration and idols.
What kind of billboards? Like highway billboards?
I don't know if maybe I don't have a picture for this. There's a as a group you can. How can I say that? You can order a billboard that says, "I love you so much, Jimin," who is one member of the BTS. So they are used to basically crowdfund such billboards. Mm-hmm. And the same system has now been used to crowdfund protesters' help. And so they could buy protective materials from the police brutality, like goggles and umbrellas and so on and so forth. So that was one primary use of K-pop, the fact that the fans were already connected. So they activated their networks for a different purpose, from, fandom to political activism. And that obviously later on spread quite a lot. I think I'm having some numbers here. The young Thai woman who started this protest gathered $25,000 in 9 hours to support pro-democracy protests. And this is in a country where a dollar is weighting quite a lot. So $25,000 is significant.
The baht, right? That's the Thai currency?
Baht. Yeah. Baht. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. And later, more K-pop fans mobilized and raised $300,000 for an organization called Thai Lawyers for Human Rights. That's quite a lot, and that's on Twitter. And then on Facebook, there's a private group called Royalist Marketplace and has over 1 million members. And Telegram was used just as in Belarus to coordinate strategic action. And even Tinder, which is a dating app, was used to spread the agenda of the protesters, who tend to be youth and tend to be females, as viewers of the live stream can see behind me. Also very interesting, typically in Thai society, you don't have a lot of prominence of, or you don't give a lot of agency to women, and in particular young women. But in this case, they really took it. So the leader of the Thai protest, that is now one of the leaders that is currently under police arrest, is a young woman. And that echoes quite a lot the protests in Hong Kong in 2019, from where the Thai protesters borrowed a lot of strategies, including the use of emojis to communicate strategically and to do voting. Also a lot of hand signs to coordinate action. Really quite interesting learning through social media, basically. So they watched videos of the Hong Kong protests that were also led, among others, by a woman who is currently under arrest, Agnes Chow. Anyway, so wanted to say there's a lot of activism, pro-democracy activism, that is taking place both on established, but in particular in this kind of encrypted or smaller social media channels like Telegram. And that is definitely a trend. And of course, Black Lives Matter is a marker for the US mobilization before the elections, and marking probably the results of the elections.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what is the other sort of big music sensation where activism could have happened, you know, a few years ago. That, okay, we have K-pop now, fair enough, but before it was NSYNC, it was Hanson and Backstreet Boys, and you didn't have these channels at that time. So I wonder if,
my God, all these bands.
if they would have been mobilized to be more political, if there was...
They could use the mainstream media, I suppose. They would make statements that would be...
Yeah, but there's just a lot of fandom, right? So there's an interesting fandom...
Letters.
fandom activism link. That wasn't... We've had similar fandom before, right? Yeah. But not similar activism, so...
Which is this idea of intermediation, right? That's quite powerful. Anyway, there's probably much more to say. So if you guys have more comments about this, you can drop them into the chat on whichever platform you are watching this. Yes, I think I'm done with my gift.
First gift.
Activism.
Activism across the world, from Belarus to Thailand. Interesting. I actually went to Minsk not too long ago.
Yeah?
It was cool. Very clean city. That's what they say, because it's a lot of that previous dictator basically had a lot of public sector employment cleaning the streets. So that was kind of so everyone told us in Minsk was clean streets here. Yeah.
Well, always see the positive.
Exactly. Okay. Before going to the next gift, I think we should maybe bring in another question so we make sure that we
cover
hit them all.
Yeah.
Ian McCafferty, thank you very much, asks, Twitter has made extra efforts this year to tag content, manipulated media, state-affiliated accounts, disputed info, etc., rather than removing it. How do you think this has affected users and influenced other platforms? Big question. All the questions we got are super big and super tough.
And interesting, definitely.
And interesting, definitely, with a finger on the pulse. I would say, the first thing that came to my mind as a feasible answer to this is that the labels that these companies have put on, particularly election fraud tweets, is what I'm thinking of. It shows two things. One thing is a divergence of strategies across the platforms. So
stay tuned for this.
Yes. So if we remember going back to the Senate hearings after the Russian disinformation scandal, the outcome of that was American tech companies will more closely collaborate within industry to solve the problems before regulators need to step in. And what we've seen out of that is maybe behind the scenes more tech collaboration, but in terms of their policies, particularly around political ads and particularly around labeling content, completely diverging strategies. From banning political ads or allowing this post, but when other people post it apart from the president, we'll talk about that later, the public interest exception, we basically see a bunch of diverging strategies on labeling and political advertising, which is not tighter industry collaboration. So I think we move to the EU in terms of like codes of conduct about mutual approaches to solving some of these issues. The platforms are not doing it. They're just not doing it.
So apropos the last part of the question, I don't think Twitter's true choice did not really influence other platforms to copy. It was actually an argument for Twitter standing out in this diversity of options and maybe gaining some form of clout as being the ones most keen to fighting disinformation.
I think Twitter sees I think this has been going on for some time, where Twitter sees an opening to, when all the eyes are on Facebook, to become more transparent in their operation.
Look at their reports as well and all that.
Exactly. So I think that's point one. Point two, in terms of how it's affected users, is this really makes this type of flagging content politicized.
Yes.
So when Facebook or Twitter starts to flag content, it can easily be turned into a political issue about censorship. So we saw this with Ted Cruz and Jack Dorsey facing off, right? About Section 230. The congressional hearing was about Section 230, but what got played out of that was Ted Cruz getting a chance to fire at Jack Dorsey and saying, you do censorship, which was really not about Section 230 at all. So what I think the adverse effect of these labels, particularly because they're not unified across the different platforms.
And because each platform decides.
Is that it feeds into discourses around censorship, and it feeds into conspiracy theories and all sorts of things. So that would be my answer to how it affects users. And in terms of influencing other platforms, there's just no concerted strategy, which I think there should be. In a sense, it makes it harder to label them as one entity, like you are your utility, because you're all taking different approaches in some sense. But that's maybe another topic.
Yes. We'll come back to some of this in one of the gifts that I'm going to give the audience. So maybe, Ian, you'll get supplementary answers then.
Yes. All right. So,
your gift
3.
2. Oh, gift
2 for me.
Yeah.
Gift 3 of the overall.
Yes. I'm like,
Yeah, I struggled with what to call this. I will call it political ads broadly. But, and then I just mentioned, there's been a lot to say about political ads this year in a very scattered approach to dealing with them, right? So we have platforms like Twitter, Google, Spotify banning ads entirely, at least in terms of Twitter and Spotify, probably not going to make much money off of them anyways. Facebook took an interesting approach where they decided to ban the approval of new ads a week before the election, but
just to make things very, very complicated.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is I saw a tweet from Who Targets Me, this group that tries to use browser plugins to reverse engineer the targeting strategies of campaigns. And they were publishing, and I'm sure that other campaigns were doing this as well, is that once you basically say what you're going to post on Facebook in the week up before an election, then other campaigns can go in the ad library and see what those strategies are going to be. So it's an easy way to reverse engineer those strategies. And so it was just, I think Facebook put a pretty big pause, not just on the approval of new ads, but in terms of getting data out of their API. I tried doing that the week before the election. It was really sketchy. I don't think people really thought about the fact that once you have all the ads sort of public that are going to run the week before the election, there's going to be a huge amount of opposition research into what your opponent is doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was a bit of a
It did not work as planned. Let's put it this way.
It did not. But I'm going to keep the focus on ads to a digital event that I basically just saw a link on Twitter, and it was the Democratic National Committee's breakdown of the election in terms of digital, which obviously played a huge role in this election. And so I thought I'd share some insights from 2 calls that I joined. Again, it was sort of open to the public in a sense that it wouldn't be before, right? This is usually a very
Zoom
sort of high-paying
effect.
event, but it was just free on Zoom if you registered. And so the first session I attended was called Blowing Up the Death Star, Digital Ads in the 2020 Cycle.
Oh, I love the name.
Which sounds so cool, but the session actually wasn't that interesting, unfortunately. Although there were a couple prior podcast guests in there, which was fun to see. So some takeaways from that briefly, before I get into what I really want to talk about, is what they were talking about. So we had like people doing digital for Biden and Harris and all up and down ballot. They basically said something that we've seen or we've heard quite a bit on the podcast, which is this idea of like native advertising. So fitting ad content into the experience of the platform,
Yes.
right? Like dropping that mic into a conversation rather than having something constructed.
Which is, I think, very interesting immersion approach, right? This is what I think also will continue as a trend.
Definitely. But then how do you actually test to make sure that you're doing that correctly? And so there was a couple testing tips. So I guess this section is kind of a little bit geared towards people who are working, in industry or campaigning. And so I picked out a couple of testing tips. One is that repetitive copy ads asking people to donate work.
They do work.
So basically, bombard people with messages asking them to donate. You may think that turns people off.
Yeah.
Apparently, it works. I should also mention that the DNC had its highest levels of grassroots fundraising ever this year, which probably has something to do with Trump, but also I think they were kind of pivoting that towards
and with the
digital.
Black Lives Matter.
Exactly. So repetitive copy ads work, surprisingly. There's also, this is something I plan to dig in a little bit next year on the podcast, is that you can use platforms. There's one called Swayable, which is basically a cloud-based service where you can test your creative on a sort of
Smaller
target group
yeah.
before it goes. So that was mentioned. Interestingly, when you put out a new ad, one of the campaigners mentioned simply going into the Facebook comments to see if someone is saying something negative about the ad. You can take that comment, even though it's obviously not representative, back to your production team.
Facebook comments are the bee's knees for everyone interested. Just think we should know much more about that, but they're behind closed doors at the moment.
Yes. I already mentioned earlier coronavirus making things differently in answer to Tom's question. So there was more direct to camera.
Yeah.
There was limited production capabilities. So that was that. Now, the second event I attended was much more interesting and provided some real data on mobilizing and persuasion effects of political ads via randomized field experiments.
Exciting.
It was called Does Digital Work? Yes, and Lessons to Measure It Effectively. Now, I will also use this opportunity to plug that I was so interested in this that I've reached out to one of the people doing these types of experiments for the group Priorities USA. That will be our second episode next year. So
Wow.
I'm very excited for that interview.
Definitely.
So this was all about, it was basically a bunch of people from Priorities USA, which is an advocacy group that runs field experiments to measure the effects of digital ads on mobilization and persuasion. They may do other things too, but this is sort of what the session was about. And they've been running experiments from 2018 up until 2020
longitudinal,
midterms
yes.
To see. Basically, their first question was, do digital ads work? Are they effective? And then if so, what are the strategies and sort of targeting approaches to make them more effective? So I will skip a bit of the nitty gritty here. We'll get into that.
Because there'll be more podcast episodes.
There'll be more podcasts. So basically, they tested some like municipal elections. And what they do is they basically run randomized field experiments where they will show a treatment group and a control group ads, and they will measure the effect on voter turnout or on different issues based on a pre and post test survey. This is what we'll dig into real deeply in the next episode. But they found that ads significantly increased voter mobilization by about, it ranges between 0.5% and 1% increase
That's
in mobilization.
Huge.
So yes, small number, but potentially big implications.
When you think about how many people are being exposed to the ads,
Exactly.
especially on social media.
And what's interesting about this experiment they ran is that it's this result occurred even when there was a massive TV ad buy going on at the same time. So it was like, it wasn't that the TV would necessarily eat up all of the digital, but that the digital could actually still contribute.
I think it's a hybridization effect, or maybe a reinforcing effect, depending on how you plan it, which I'm again looking forward to find out more.
Me too. I haven't drafted the questions for that yet, but it'll be an interesting one. So then they looked at the different treatment lengths. Should you be running your ad at 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks? What is the optimal time? And what they found was that basically you get some effect at 2 weeks, it doubles or more than doubles at 4 weeks, and then it gets higher into 8 weeks, but the growth kind of stalls. So long story short, they put it that 4 weeks is the optimal number compared, like if you compare 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and 8 weeks, you should be running a 4-week
interval
mobilization campaign. Keep hitting people with ads for 4 weeks.
That's the sweet spot. So getting them mobilized, but not too overburdened by repetition.
Now,
nice.
Interesting. So they've been kind of, in a sense, they've been doing a lot of like academic techniques.
Well, I'm sure these people are trained just as we are.
In a real election, right?
Yeah.
So when they look at, another thing they compared is looking at what's called first-party targeting. This is when you upload a list. So this is what we generally think of with micro-targeting. You upload a list of people and you target them. Yeah. So they tested the effect of that group versus a group that was predicted via the lookalike audiences that the platform would deliver.
That is actually super interesting.
And
the platform wins, let me guess.
Yes. Well, they at least found that it works.
The targeting algorithms are more efficient.
Yeah, or at least what they were saying is that it's better in terms of like price point. And I mean, there's basically the argument is that if you do all of your own polling and you just hit this group, you're going to get a lot of extra benefit by buying into the lookalike audiences of the platforms rather than just trying to do everything yourself.
More efficient.
Yes. Again, we're going to break down this more in depth, so I don't have all the ins and outs because I was just listening on a stream that was kind of closed. This is all more or less from notes I took. So when they were going into different segments of the population, they found that digital ads were most likely in terms of persuasion to persuade voters of color. And I don't remember exactly how they measured persuasion, but whatever it was like 6% probably attitude change, or maybe it was 6% of the block that they tested. I'm not sure. But that number was about 6%, whereas it was about 1 to 2% for other groups. Basically, their argument was digital ads work for all demographics, but particularly for voters of color, which is interesting.
It makes me think about the 23% of Americans that were persuaded to sway their opinion in the Pew research. So there's apparently what we can draw from this mutually reinforcing stat is that social media is working for persuasion, which has been a debatable point in the academic literature, whether it's mobilization only or persuasion can actually happen. I think some of this data shows that it can actually be.
It suggests it does, and I think mobilization is much easier to measure because you have the actual concrete voting output as measured by public records. Persuasion is a bit messier, so that's what I'm really looking forward to ask Nick at Priorities USA. They also briefly talked about the value of platform metrics in experimental designs. So they said like things like video completion rates are very useful to see if people have been exposed to the ad, but they did not find correlations between persuasion and other indicators like reactions or shares. However,
there is
our friend Solomon Messing did.
Yes, because now he works for a different company than he used to work.
Yes, so a different advocacy group, Acronym. They have a really interesting blog post. I will link to it in the show notes. And Solomon, obviously a great academic now in the campaigning space. And it's true that these share numbers you can't correlate them to changes in persuasion, but you add a little bit of political psychology literature, a little bit of machine learning, and this is what you get. So basically what Acronym was doing is they were running similar experiments. They would measure people's attitudes before, treat them, and measure their attitudes afterwards with a post-test survey. And what they found is that basically likes, shares, click-through rates, these things don't matter. But if you nuance reactions into emojis, emoticons, you can get a pretty good idea, because political psychology research says that if an ad induces fear or anxiety, people are more likely to be persuaded. It breaks you from your partisan habits. This is like well established in political psych. So what they found is that ads high in sad emojis and anger emojis could be
like
correlated to persuasion. Not negative.
Negative emotions.
But in a sense, that's kind of where the catch is, because positive emotions should then have a similar effect or the opposite effect, right?
Yeah.
So a like or something really didn't work. What they found is that a ha-ha, which you would think would be like a support.
It's very interesting. Lynn Sandberg, that is also a friend of ours and recently defended her PhD on social media and politics on European campaigns, also finds at the qualitative level the effect of differentiating by emojis.
Yes.
So, and she did find that humor, the ha-ha, was very significant for populist politicians. So there's definitely more research to be done there, but it seems that from different environments and using different methodologies, we still get this focus on disentangling emotions on the internet. And I know there are several other listeners like Anna Bill Jaroszewska from Trondheim, also working on emojis and emotions on platform. I think this is basically a very interesting future avenue of research that maybe we'll be looking more into the future.
Yes.
In investigating.
The thing is that it's already in the political psychology literature from a guy named Tim Brader back in 2005, 2006. He read a bunch of these experiments, and Solomon himself has been doing a lot of work around negative campaigning and stuff. So he basically took these insights, and if you take this positive negative breakdown, like this just it's not nuanced enough. It doesn't explain the whole thing.
I obviously generalized, but it's something that we also use when we wanted to classify ideologies, right? Like a like or a positive emotion signifies that you want to affiliate yourself or support of a certain ideology that is expressed in the content of a post. Whereas if you don't, then especially if you're angry, then you can interpret that as being critical of that ideology.
Yeah, and that wasn't a criticism by any means, but it was just that if you, in a sense, it's just what I'm trying to say is it's not that simple. If you take this logic of like it's positive or negative, which is all about like what these like social listening things purport to do, right? Like we'll give you positive and negativity in tweets. You run a risk if you do that. Let's put it that way. So they found that if a post had a lot of ha-has, the laughing face, that didn't signal that people were ideologically aligned with the message. That's what the positive would make you think. That was actually a backlash saying, yeah, this ad is terrible. Exactly. So what they did is they ran a correlation analysis to basically check this. And you can see there's a clear difference between ha-has and sads and angries. So in short, ha-has signal backlash. Those high in angry or sadness tended to be more persuasive. So what they did is they built a machine learning model using these scores that they called the ha-ha ratio. And they called this model Dorothy, named after Dorothy Thompson, who was a journalist in the 1930s who helped expose fascism. So they were able to take this hunch and validate it on more experiments. And what they ended up doing, and this is really cool, is they built this system.
The Dorothy system.
and they shared it with other campaigns where you could upload your ad, it would start being beta tested, and based on the results of the ha-ha ratio, it would be automatically allocated based on audience demographics, the responsive rates, the bid market of the ad. So they would optimize that.
That's a very useful
And so
tool.
that's what happens when you put some sort of academic
In charge of
thinking
things.
into some data science muscle. So
and it's exactly, I'm very happy about having this qualitative check from Sandberg's work, because that's exactly what she finds, that haha is not an approval. It's actually more often than not a critique or some form of distance taking.
Exactly. So you can use all these data scientist techniques to optimize the location. But at the end of the day, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? People they're showing that they're disapproving with a ha-ha, not an angry. And that's where the positive negative gets a bit troublesome in terms of what all these social media marketers will claim to do.
Interesting, definitely. And I'm looking forward to read more about this Dorothy approach.
Yes. Okay, wrapping up here. I want to go to the difference between engagement and persuasion briefly, which goes back.
This is a huge
which
topic.
goes back to Priorities USA. And there was an interesting analysis that they did. So this is the group that found this sort of like 0.5, 1% increase in mobilization with digital ads for progressive campaigns. And what they found, first, what they did is they took these Lincoln Project ads.
Yeah.
So these ads that were, pretty controversial on the left, but were seen as, wildly successful in terms of their reach. And what they did is they basically ran these ads in a controlled experiment where you had 5 treatment groups and 1 control group. Each treatment group consisted of 683 respondents. And what they found is that the ads that performed the best on Twitter were actually the least persuasive. And the correlation that they draw is negative 0.3. So basically the argument is that the more engagement that a Lincoln Project ad got, it was probably somewhere in the range of 30% less effective in terms of persuasion. And the Lincoln Project actually agreed with these findings, saying that we weren't going for persuasion necessarily. We were trying to get in Trump's
Exposure,
head, cause infighting among the campaign. They attributed slightly, or they say that they basically played a part in the firing of Brad Parscale, for example, not directly, but by sort of
exposing some of the
outperforming with metrics, but not necessarily persuasion. So the last thing on this GIF is that Nick, who will be a future guest on the podcast, basically sent the journalist who published a story about the Lincoln Ad Project and the experiments, the ad that Priorities found to be the most successful in terms of persuasion. So I thought we'd watch it and see kind of what that ad looks like. Because it is definitely not a...
not what you'd think.
Yeah.
Let's see.
It's not a Lincoln Project ad, that's for sure.
It's like watching a slow-motion car wreck. How did we get here? Well, Donald Trump ignored experts, downplayed the crisis, and now coronavirus and our economy are spiraling out of control. Joe Biden will listen to science, confront the virus, and rebuild our economy. His plans create good jobs, improve access to affordable health care, expand Medicare, and student debt relief. It's time for Joe Biden. Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this ad.
So vanilla.
I was thinking about that podcast episode with the voice actors.
Me too, exactly. Every time I see an ad, I think about those guys.
So cool. One of my favorites, actually, of the recent podcast.
So it's sort of this bread and butter, like, kind of, and Joe Biden's the perfect candidate for that. You can have all these trendy ads that are getting viral on Twitter and getting talked about in the media, but really, what works for persuasion is these kind of boring old issue ads that...
Also, the contrast between the way it was presented was pretty clear. Oh. Anyway, looking at the clock, I think our goal is to keep it very short and sweet for the remaining 4 gifts.
Oh my God. No, we only have 3 gifts left.
We only have 3 gifts left. Well,
and my last gift is very short.
We do still have some listener questions as well. Do you want to check if there's any questions coming in from social? Because I can go ahead and talk a little bit about my gift number 2.
Yes, do that.
While you are checking if there's something happening there. And that gift is, as I have basically said from the very first edition of this Year in Review episode, regulation. And maybe it has become my responsibility to deal with that, even though I am not a lawyer. Let it be very clear. But obviously, that which I have prophesied already 5 years ago is beginning increasingly to take shape, and that is the attempt of governments and governmental authorities of various kinds to try to get a hold of some unified approach to regulating platform activity. And again, we're filming really very close to several big announcements and big events, so there's not a lot of analysis, especially not from a non-legal expert like myself. But obviously, we have the Federal Trade Commission in the United States that has initiated a very large lawsuit on behalf of 48 states within the United States against Facebook, and claiming that they should even be broken up into smaller bits, basically forcing Facebook to sell Instagram and WhatsApp. I'm not going to comment on the intricacies of this, but this signals the desire of the Trade Commission to treat this as a case of monopoly action, and the desire of the Trade Commission to basically improve competition in the digital marketplace. I don't think there will be a lot of positive conclusions from their point of view to this particular attempt, but at least it sends a signal to Facebook.
Yeah, I don't think any conclusions will come
anytime soon.
Yeah, within the next 5 years, but don't quote me on that.
It sends a signal to Facebook because it's almost like a concerted action with a European regulation. And maybe on this I'll spend slightly more time, but not too much time, because these declarations have just been made like 3 days ago, if I'm not mistaken. So it's really fresh off the press. But in Europe, at the level of the European Commission, two very, very important pieces of legislation were made public on December 15th, and they were long awaited. They were actually delayed. They were supposed to come up December 2nd and then December 8th, and they've been leaked in some form, but finally have been made public just a couple of days ago. They are the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. And before we go any further, I think we should invite everyone to listen to the Vice President of the Commission for Digital Action. I think the name of the actual post is so cheesy, I'm not even going to say it out loud. But she's well known as a fighter against big monopolies, Margrethe Vestager.
Vestager, not Vestager.
Yeah, please. So let's hear in a short interview what she has to say about these two pieces of legislation.
Digital Services Act is there to keep us safe, so that products are safe and so that illegal content is removed.
Will you ask platforms to filter user content?
No, we don't want the filters. You complain about it, and if you're right, it should go back up.
If your content was removed.
Some of the traders out there, their products are not safe. So if they're taken down, they should stay down and not reappear under a different name. Yes, you will. You will know why things are ranked. Why am I shown this product or that post, instead of that just being completely black box to you? Digital Markets Act is about responsibility. If you're really successful and you grow in size, well, with great powers come great responsibility. If you're in the scope of this legislation, you're a gatekeeper. Then there is the things that you must do and the things that you cannot do in order to make sure that other businesses can do well in the same market. It's great to have great services, and you should grow and you should be so successful. But what we know from not one, not two, but 3 Google cases is not necessarily fair play. That has to be sort of the last possible solution, but the possibility exists.
About splitting them up.
So FTC and the European Commission may be speaking kind of the same language. So I'll take the opportunity to also answer another question from Ian, looking at the responsibility of platforms to moderate content, because I think these two regulations basically have two major purposes. One is to level the playing field so that very big players are not occupying every space, but that there's room for contenders who don't necessarily risk to be bought by these giants. That's basically the idea, I think, behind both FTC and this regulation in terms of the digital markets. And when it comes to digital services, the major purpose is to increase transparency of how different decisions are made, and to obviously try to avoid the propagation of illegal and harmful content. And that leads me to Ian's question, and I'm not a lawyer, and disclaimer number 4 put here. What does it mean? There's been really a very interesting and complicated discussion about who should moderate content that is produced or posted on platforms, because they claim they are just platforms, which means it's not them who produces that. It's the user-generated content, and some users generate good content, some other users generate bad content. It shouldn't be up to the company to decide which one is good and which one is bad. Facebook itself, in many public positions, in a white paper that they even proposed in terms of regulation of online activity, have said that they do not want to be the arbiters of good and bad. They do not wish to play that role, and they have been supported by many other human rights groups and civil society organizations who said these decisions should not be left to the private world, the private companies' world, because their desire to obey the law by removing illegal content may come against a human right, which is the freedom of expression. So where do we draw the lines, especially if these companies are active in non-democratic societies? Going back to my example about Belarus, but obviously Thailand and
or even just between like U.S. and EU with different, Germany has a different threshold for freedom of speech.
And France as well, right? Yeah. So it's obviously a very thorny issue. And one interesting proposal, or one interesting idea is to separate between illegal and harmful content. And the proposal that made its way into the legal text is that illegal content should be preemptively, like ex ante, be taken down by platforms on the basis of algorithms that function well. And I love this because it's where artificial intelligence comes into play very prominently. The idea is that in contexts where natural language processing, NLP, works well, those filters, those algorithms should be used to preemptively take down content. For example, child abuse. Mm-hmm. That is an area where NLP works very well, and it signals very clearly this is illegal content, so that content never sees the light of day.
There's also a massive database of known child. This is something I got from Tarleton Gillespie's book, is that one of the reasons it's so effective is because there's this huge curated database of child pornography pictures that are known, so it's very easy to match.
To train, yeah. Exactly. And so there's great artificial intelligence power behind that. So in that area, there's no contestation. The algorithm filtering would work. In other areas like hate speech, which is also an illegal option, what is one's hate speech and what is others' joke or sarcasm, the ha-ha moment, right? Very difficult for any algorithm to detect. And this is where preemptive action is not recommended. Instead, labeling, this can possibly be harmful, this is contested information, is instead to be preferred. And that leads me to the harmful content. And harmful content is content that is not necessarily illegal, but may have a harmful consequence. And examples of this is information that is misleading, misinformation or disinformation, as well as, any kind of cyberbullying and so on. So that's not illegal, but it's harmful. And this is where it's not possible to intervene in this preemptive way. There should be a more responsibility that is being taken. A warning label, or in any way that platforms themselves would want to intervene, and that's what is called the intermediary responsibility, the responsibility of the platform, who is an intermediary but cannot just dismiss any kind of responsibility. And that's where the Europeans are very firm, including by the introduction of several quite serious fees.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open question, and it's so tough because there's so many calls. There's a lot of gloom and doom books written about social media, and a lot of critics out there, especially in academia, and they want platforms to do more, but then it's like, really, what is the?
And this is the thing, like the European solution is actually not to have platforms self-regulate, and it's actually the introduction of basically these two texts give more power to the Commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think government needs to set the bounds, because this is not just a platform issue. Any private, I think
The new platforms also that come up and so on.
I think you can look at these social media companies not as having a democratic responsibility as much as you may want to do that. If you throw that out the window, how much does McDonald's have a democratic responsibility, right?
Well, there's some corporate responsibility.
Think of them as a
but
corporation that tries to optimize dollars and cents for shareholders, right? This is sort of capitalist logic. So if you apply that to platforms and you kind of take out all of the normative things that go around it, companies optimize for profit and they work within the bounds of the law. Now, they always try to bend the law. Like, yeah, and I mean, that's what they do. They move their finances offshore. That's why, Amazon pays almost no tax, right? Because companies generally are smarter than governments. They can move faster than governments. So it becomes the job of governments to set the rules.
And that's what the EU is doing. They propose an independent, kind of not necessarily not equipped with a lot of power, but a board, the European Board for Digital Services, that will help national regulators to sanction instances where the platforms must assume this responsibility and moderate content, right? So there is a coordinated effort, but a lot of responsibility is going to be placed on national EU member states governments to basically respond to the diversity of regulation, like Germany and France being, as you were saying, very, very strict, and Sweden at the opposite end of this continuum being very, very lax because of legal traditions that evolved quite differently over the hundreds of years, right? So definitely we can see here that there is a clear attempt to regulate companies, not self-regulation. And to answer to Ian's question, I don't think it's going to be easy, but I do think that because of this extra pressure that these two legal texts are going to exert both on the platforms themselves and these big gatekeepers, but also on national governments to make legislation on this, there will be a more effective way to filter out illegal content. When it comes to harmful content, this is exactly as you were saying earlier, this is a politicized issue, as when Trump tweets become flagged and so on. I think in those cases where Twitter did use the flagging option, there were very clear and almost undisputable statements or manipulations that enabled them to do so. Facebook didn't do that. They did not label or take down the same message that was basically posted. I mean, slightly different form, but the same content on Facebook. So two different approaches. This platform divergence cannot be continued too much in the future if they are to respect the new European rules.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. I think, and I don't know, again, also not a lawyer, don't know the ins and outs of it, but I did see a tweet that was talking about, I think it was a tweet you shared.
Yeah, I was documenting myself on the legal backward. I could probably talk much more about this, but I decided to leave it to the lawyers.
That there is I don't know what aspect of the law is broken or whatever, but the penalty is a 10% cut of annual revenue. So there was some previous criticism in some earlier fines, even from the EU, which was like, okay, this is like, half a day of Facebook's ad revenue. Well, now 10% of your annual revenue, that's brutal.
That's going to be felt in the pocket.
So at least there are some teeth there, and we'll see. But I like it. I mean, I'm not like, I don't know, I'm not like hawkish on platforms and what they do. I think they're just companies that do what they do.
And there's a need for what they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so successful.
There's a need for government to step in and at least to show like, hey, we're government.
Provide guidance. And I think the platforms, as far as my conversations with any representatives of the bigger platforms, I think they welcome this. At least they know where the ball is. They know what to follow, and then they can skip things. I also wanted to add one final element on this. I could talk obviously much more, but it's this idea of algorithmic transparency that Vesta was also talking about in her brief interview. The responsibility of platforms to explain why different decisions were taken, in particular why certain content was flagged. So it's not a black box, and this particular aspect that has implications implications for social media has implications for any algorithm, even outside social media. If we think about the job selection algorithms, interview algorithms, and algorithms that help accessing welfare services and so on and so forth. This idea of algorithmic transparency is definitely trending, and I think we'll see more and more domains falling under these requirements.
Interesting to see how that works, because the very mechanisms that make algorithms in terms of machine learning are non-transparent themselves. So.
And final thought, again, I've been working quite a lot with artificial intelligence recently, and another kind of problematic thing that is very rarely discussed is, what if you can game the algorithm because you know how it works? So if you understand the different weights of different variables which are going to be provided to you because it's part of the requirement, then you can maybe more strategically present your case to the authorities, emphasizing that aspect which you know is probably weighted heavier compared to other.
Well, this is why Twitter, for example, doesn't release the metrics they use to select accounts for their influence operations data set. Because if you release how you identified that accounts were coming from China, then China can see those metrics and work to outpace them.
Yeah,
so,
you got this one, got us this once,
yeah.
but not again. We're
so,
going to get better.
In a sense, non-transparency is a necessary evil in some cases.
So there's a logic behind, and of course, this is not new. Like, people try to game the algorithm, the system in so many ways for centuries, right? But it's just like it takes a more obvious, how can I say, pattern when we deal with algorithms that specify variables very specifically. So anyway, that is my gift about regulation. And my trend displaying is saying, yeah, there will be more of it, but these two regulations in particular from the EU will probably affect also the way the American regulators will think about it.
I'm just thinking that we're at the 2-hour mark here. Luckily,
we had good intentions.
We really tried to keep it short, but and I thought we would actually, because I thought this would not be so much happening, because it'd be all like coronavirus. But man, this social media and politics, there's a lot to dig into.
So move to.
So I will move on. But we have to do due diligence to our people who send in questions.
Yes.
So there is a question from Nils Gustafsson here in Lund. Thank you, Nils. He says, a question for you. If the US and EU attempts of breaking up the social media monopolies would actually work, and there would suddenly be a plethora of competing social media startups with fragmented audiences, what would that mean for political communication during election campaigns?
That's
Again,
another
huge question.
Yes, but very good one, very thought-provoking.
So I have two thoughts that that came to mind when thinking about this question.
Yes.
And one, so the question is, when you have more social media companies, if they're broken up and they're forced to basically scatter, what would that mean for political communication? And something that I think you, me, and Nils had talked about previously off the podcast was that, at least I would think that Facebook would do, if it knew it had to sell Instagram, it would probably start unraveling Instagram before it got sold. It's not going to let Instagram go and then try to outrun Facebook. So that's just a side point. But I think there's two key points that we should think about when it comes to social media platforms fragmented. When do campaigns adopt them? Right? I think this is where Ben Epstein's book is absolutely fantastic with this historical view. But number one is that the output data to campaigns plays a massive role. So through this podcast, interviewing different people back in the 2016 election, Snapchat, which was an up-and-comer at the time, it had the potential to engage young audiences for activism, whatever it was. They could not tell the campaigns how many people were seeing their stories. The campaigns had to email Snapchat, and Snapchat would come back with a CSV list. This did not work in terms of the campaigns going to their...
It wasn't serving their interests.
Going to their headquarters and saying, I need more money for Snapchat, because here I can show you that we're raising this much money on the platform. So if the infrastructure of the platform isn't built for reporting, which will likely happen, I think even a platform like TikTok, right, which has exploded. Why are political campaigns not necessarily going there
Well, several reasons, but one of them is probably it's not
But one
good
of them is
infrastructure.
because it doesn't have a political ad targeting suite like Facebook does. So I think the reporting, the infrastructure, the back-end infrastructure around reporting how many people saw this, how persuadable were they, how many actions did they take, that's crucial.
Yeah.
And if you're an upstart platform, and if there's multiple platforms competing, you're probably putting a lot of resources on the front end in terms of user experience and stuff like that. You probably don't have a well-designed system.
So you think basically the competition would not be equal even then? Like it would not be a leveling of the playing field?
Well, I think some platforms could, I think if you have competition, some platforms would try to have that reporting feature to advertisers to get more money, but others might focus on going viral first and then build that in later. That's kind of Snapchat's model. And it didn't work out in terms of political communication. The second is that if you fragment these audiences into different platforms, another thing that was a lesson from 2016 was, again, why wasn't Snapchat and Instagram used so much? Well, part of it has to do with the reporting from Snapchat. Another part is where is the older audience? At least in the United States, that's who tends to vote and that's who has money.
Yeah.
So the money part is specifically most to the US, but also in Germany and other countries. So platforms with older audiences are going to be targeted more by campaigns. So if you fragment platforms, your TikToks of the world versus a platform for septuagenarians or older people is probably going to be targeted because those people are more likely to donate and more likely to vote.
And I'm going to respond to this question with one more element kind of related to your second response. And that is that perhaps what we will see instead of knowing exactly where to find the middle ground, we'll have this plethora of echo chambers, self-selected, self-built echo chambers. And I'm thinking about Parlay or Parler, whatever you call it, and Gab on the right side of politics, that there is a self-selected process that makes these smaller companies reserved for those who share the same ideology, and that the mainstream will not capture these voices. We will ignore what is being said, sometimes hear with only 1 year or half a year, so to say. And that would lead maybe to this fragmentation. People don't know what they're talking about. Maybe mainstream parties will target only some groups, but not reach out to these other segments of the population that maybe would be increasingly radicalized because they would be like self-reinforcing ideologies.
Yeah, man. And I had one more thought. This is how things get long, is that I'm thinking about, I think it was Vice News did a really interesting documentary on Roger Stone and his connection to InfoWars in the Trump campaign. So Roger Stone is essentially a surrogate who gave InfoWars legitimacy during the 2016 cycle because that was viewed as a strategic audience to bring into the Trump campaign.
Yes.
So he was so in a sense, I think,
it made InfoWars mainstream there when it was a marginal
exactly.
channel.
So the size of the audience matters. Also, InfoWars probably did have an older audience, and so there's something to say about how can you form coalitions with fragmented platform audiences that are discounted, like you're saying, Parler, Gab, these audiences. Gab never got legitimacy. They have an account waiting for Trump. Had Trump joined it,
maybe he will now that he's out of office.
Maybe he will now. Which brings us to the fifth gift.
The fifth gift.
Which is called Tweets from the Dead.
Tweets from the Dead.
Okay. Man. All right. So.
The afterlife of social media.
The afterlife, yeah. So this is going to be pretty short.
Because they're dead.
This is just something that, but it has long-standing implications for those of you out there watching. So
for those of you who are still alive.
Yeah. Well, I think we're moving through different time zones at this point. So
yes,
Americans are getting off work on Friday. And podcast listeners may be asleep, but if they're still listening, then let's. I saw this, and when I saw this thing happen, I was like, this is going to be one of my gifts for the year in review. And this is Herman Cain tweeting from the dead. So Herman Cain, CEO of Godfather's Pizza, presidential candidate in 2016, developer of the 999 plan.
Yes, not a very known figure on this side. No.
It was like you would take basically a 9% flat tax on income, state tax, and what's the other one I'm forgetting?
Federal and state. So
federal,
state, and local.
Yeah, something like that.
Typically.
Yeah. Anyways, so it was like a way to kind of like even the tax code, and but it's also kind of funny because this is like a pizza thing. Like Domino's has the 555. Anyways,
cultural references.
So Herman Cain, So this guy, so he ends up dying from coronavirus.
No.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Let me just go here to the slides to show you. So he, shortly before he contracts and dies of, I should say, coronavirus complications.
Yeah, well,
right?
Rarely you die of it. You die
exactly.
Because
So he tweets that he's going to a Trump rally, that masks will not be mandatory. People are fed up. So he's sort of going into the anti-mask sort of movement, which is, whatever.
So ironic that he died of it.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, just to be this is like eggshells here to walk on. We don't know that he contracted coronavirus at the rally. We don't know he died of coronavirus or some pre-existing condition that was activated by coronavirus. Just to be, to put it out there. So he basically, before he died, he tweeted that he was going to a rally where there wouldn't be masks. There was a picture. He also tweeted a picture of himself at the rally without a mask. He ends up dying a few weeks later, and from his account comes the tweet. There were a few tweets, one attacking Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but another one saying, it looks like the virus is not as deadly as the mainstream media first made it out to be.
Tweets from the dead.
Tweet from the dead, right? And so this is coming from the Herman Cain account. The picture I'm showing here has the Cain gang. I'm not sure if that was the original. But basically, the moral of the story is what happens to a public figure, or especially a political figure, to their audience when they die. In this case, the Cain family decided to take the account and use it to continue tweeting about politics ahead of an election. And
I find it slightly surprising.
It is surprising. So it's important to note that so the Cain account had about 550,000,
That's
600,000
impressive amount of
Twitter followers. Before his death. And it's worth noting that there is a media apparatus behind the Herman Cain ecosystem. So they have a website, hermancain.com, and a lot of their tweets are amplifying the
content from there.
The commentary stories from the website. And this is very interesting. So they have 1.5 million followers on Facebook. And again, they're just really reposting from the website. So they're using social media as an amplification tool. Yeah. They have an editor, they have, copywriters, they have all this stuff. But one of Herman Cain's daughters basically said, I will continue the mission of Herman Cain via rebranding his account, the Cain Gang. And by putting these very polarizing tweets, attacking Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, trying to pick up on coronavirus trending topics. Of course, there may be a political mission behind this type of usage of a dead person's account, but it clearly is because there's a team that's being paid behind it. There's money involved. Yes, and that's what I want to say. So interestingly, if you go to the Herman Cain website and you read about Herman Cain, it is not updated to reflect that he's died.
Oh no! So if you don't know for some reason that he's dead, you may be under the impression that it's he himself who does that writing.
Exactly. I don't think that is a necessarily. I don't think that's what's the word I'm looking for. I think that's negligence rather than
intent.
Intent. So I think they've made clear moves to rebrand the Herman Cain account as the Cain Gang, but they haven't updated the About Me site of the Herman Cain sort of mothership to reflect that Herman Cain has that. It still says that he is an active pastor at this church, which is interesting. I think that signals that it is about money and ad revenue.
I think this is definitely to be corrected, let's say.
So
it's cheating.
There was confusion in the original part. I would just point out that when they changed the name, we see that the Twitter verification mark has gone from blue to white, from the Herman Cain to the Cain Gang. Mm-hmm. So now it's morphed into something new.
What does it mean, the white?
The white is, it's not blue, which I think is an individual.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and it made me think about, okay, Biden and Trump are the oldest political candidates in history, right? Biden has 21 million followers, which is
21 million.
40 times Cain's account, and Trump is exponential. He's 88 million followers.
Unbelievable.
What happens to that account when he dies? What happens to that account after his presidency is the first step?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Independent of your gift, what will happen to all the...
So it goes back to what you were talking about in terms of content flagging, which is currently, as president, both Facebook and Twitter give Trump a public interest exception. That's why when other people tweet or post the same things that Trump has, they get taken down, but Trump doesn't. Trump is under a protective clause from the platforms that he is
a public responsible, like he's a politician representing the nation.
Exactly. And basically in October, so 2 months ago, Twitter said it would remove this exception for Trump after he leaves office, but Facebook will keep it in place for Trump's account, which again shows the kind of diverging policies.
Which is very nice because that would tune very nicely into the final gift that I will bring to the audience. But maybe you have some more things to say about the dead tweeting.
I have just a few, yeah. I'll try to shorten it, which is basically there is a pretty big issue about what to do with accounts after people die, especially
regular people.
Especially, regular and public figures. So Facebook and Instagram memorialize.
Yes.
That adds the remembering. So you can basically, there's a lot of different ways to deal with death on social media.
Because otherwise you can live forever.
So Twitter, which would maybe have dealt with some of this Cain issue, is that they introduced a policy last year that said if an account is inactive for 60 days, we will remove it.
60 days.
2 months.
Mm-hmm.
This created huge backlash from people
who tweet very rarely,
who appreciate people that they know and love to go back and look at their tweets. It's some type of like remembrance. So there was a backlash, and Twitter said, okay, we can't do this.
Yeah.
We can't solve the problem this way. Just yesterday, they released that they have new plans. They said they were going to memorialize. They haven't, but they're now looking again to do it in 2021. So it's like an evolving thing.
But do they propose how?
No, they say that we're gonna look into it, but they did take on users' feedback. And
so they're not going to remove archive in some way.
They said they would memorialize at the end of 2019, haven't, kicked the ball to 2021. So it's coming. It's coming. I thought it was interesting that TikTok has no way to memorialize or delete an account after death because the demographics are younger, even though a few notable TikTok creators have died age 16 and otherwise. Google, interestingly, has a feature called Inactive Account Manager where you can signal, if my account is inactive for X amount of time, give the data to this amount of people, or wipe it. So you can essentially manage your own data death on Twitter. I thought a great idea. We were thinking about icons earlier.
Yeah.
I thought a great idea would be the Black Panther actor Chadwick Boseman. His death was announced via his personal account, saying Chadwick has died. I thought it'd be a great move, and I haven't seen this yet because icons are so trending. When you die or when you're dead, you get a lot of likes. That you should write your own death message ahead of time. A celebrity would be like Trump, for example, could have a huge thread that would be the most liked in all of history.
Yeah.
Because
Everything he always wanted to
Yeah.
systematically put out, but I think for him this was not going to happen. He would think that it would bring bad luck.
It could, but anyways,
I'm
I thought
pretty
it'd
sure
be,
he would
I
not,
think it's a
but
great
others
idea
would.
to prepare a death tweet.
Maybe Barack Obama, as he's moving in, like in the
He would
next,
be the guy to do
Yeah,
it, right?
yeah.
And he probably heard it on this podcast. So I'd like some commission out of that. Last thing I will say about death is that it was something you alluded to earlier with this growth of platforms during COVID. Is that, so again, two themes. One, growth of platforms during COVID. Two, lack of synergy in platforms in terms of how they deal with policies. Death is one of those.
divergence.
Divergence is one of those, exactly. And so there aren't really decent removal practices for accounts in place.
Imagine if you're alone, like if you don't have any family, or if you don't want your family to access your private communication even after you're dead. Like it would be the equivalent of burning your letters, like if you were to write letters on paper, you would want to wipe that all clean, but how do you do that?
Well, Google lets you do it pretty easy. They're the only platform. Most other people can kind of show that they're related to you by showing the platform your death certificate, and they can go in and delete your account. But the point is that there aren't decent removal practices in place to remove dead accounts. And so over time, with growth on platforms, with diverging platform strategies, we may be in a fight against time between the living and the dead on social media.
I think it would be the population of the dead would be in the future be higher than the population of the living.
So there's been a study on this by two researchers at the Oxford Internet Institute. It is called "Are the Dead Taking Over Facebook? A Big Data Approach to the Future of Death Online," where they essentially modeled what is the rate of dead accounts will take over living accounts.
And the answer is?
The answer is they did two scenarios. One is that they assumed that Facebook, so this data is from 2018. They assumed that Facebook would not grow at all.
Which is unlikely.
And then they also assumed that Facebook would grow at 13% per year, which is also unlikely.
Exactly.
So there's two.
The truth is in between.
The bottom line scenario is that if Facebook does not grow from now, the number of dead profiles will outnumber the living at the year 2070.
Well, it's not really that far into the future.
You never know, man. In the second scenario, Facebook grows at 13% per year, also improbable.
Yeah.
Then the estimated zombie accounts would take over in the first decades of the 22nd century.
So futuristic to even say
So
it.
the real answer lies somewhere between the two.
Interesting.
And I will end my gift with a parting gift, a true nugget of gold, I would say, which is in researching this gift, I have found my life strategy, thinking about
what you will
dead
do
accounts on social media. Yes, I will take out a life insurance policy for cryogenics.
Yes.
And I hope that
by the time you die, it will be developed
some
technology.
years from now, maybe by the time that the dead have outnumbered the living on social media, I will be reawoken, and then I will become a digital historian for the years 1990 to 2020. And I will be the first digital historian to have both lived and then retrospectively study the period in which I lived.
I foresee
So
a
you
great
podcast
future.
listeners, you live stream watchers, you can take that idea, you run with it, and then we will have our own conference in
the 22nd
in
century.
2270.
In the 22nd century, I like this. I don't think there's much literature about this. All right, this is very futuristic. I feel like I'm bringing everybody down by bringing them back to our year 2020. But my final gift rhymes very well with what you were saying in terms of platform divergence, because it is about that, but more specifically about politics. And I wanted to show you some quick stats pointing to the fact that on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram, we simply have different people, not only like different human beings and different accounts that are alive that may be present there, but also different political orientations. It's simply different worlds. So that's a word of caution for every academic that does work on Twitter patterns and wants to generalize outside that platform. Obviously, this is becoming more and more of an established knowledge, but it's good to know.
Audiences.
audiences, there are many researchers who do
They
work
matter,
on that.
and it's something that on the podcast we hear from academics, but also campaigners. Almost everyone's like, audiences is key, right?
Yeah, and I think if you are still watching this live stream, then you can watch exactly the numbers, but I'll also put them out there in words, just in case you would see this later. Of the top 10% of Twitterers, like accounts that tweet, there is a huge imbalance in favor of pro-liberal, so left-leaning accounts. And I think that, to put in numbers, is 69% that lean towards the Democrats.
Are more likely to tweet?
The top 10% are more likely to lean Democrat, and the remaining percentage are likely to be leaning Republican. But it's clearly a bias in the Twitter demographics in that sphere. Definitely. So it's definitely something that the Twitter attempts to, for example, label different things and so on, also probably take that into account, because they know who their public is, and they know that their decision to act and curate some content is going to be met positively, because this is who their demographics are. And that comes in contrast with some other platforms. This is a chart that I take from the Axios newsletter. They looked at the CrowdTangle data that is very, very fragmentary. So again, everything has to be taken with a great caution. But it compares Instagram and Facebook. And it's clear again that Instagram is more liberal, just as I was saying in my activism gift, that the population of Instagram is younger and more liberal oriented, and that the population of Facebook is not. This is actually the most interesting part. And I think it also explains the decision of Facebook not to label, not to ban, not to put, not to suspend the privilege of Trump, a post-presidential position and so on, because the audience of Facebook leans Republican. There is a Twitter account called Facebook Top 100 that is pulling every day data from the CrowdTangle and try to measure reach.
I could see that, yeah.
And the top 10 accounts, I think 9 out of the top 10 accounts on Facebook on almost any given day are right-wing leaning pundits and news channels on Facebook, but definitely not the case when looking at Twitter or on Instagram. On Instagram, the most trending topics are climate change, Black Lives Matter, and this kind of what we call progressive topics, whereas on Facebook, it's definitely a more conservative universe, including with religious activities and so on. Mm-hmm. It's mostly through Facebook
I'm thinking one
interface.
One of the interesting things about American liberals is that there's a clear split between, it's always sort of talked about that it's, poorer, especially minority voters, and then the sort of middle tends to be Republican, and then in terms of education, at least, it's sort of like
socio-demographic status. Is that what you're?
And sort of SES classic variables, like lower class is Democrat, middle class is Republican, and then the sort of like upper PhD tends to be liberal. So that's also interesting, I think, for Twitter, because when they show these type of aggregate numbers, you don't break down between like who are the kind of like white elite people using Twitter for news, and then who are there's a huge sort of Black Twitter population as well. So they count into that liberal leaning group, and that's just the interesting thing to think about is it that the kind of middle, quote unquote, American middle class small business owner leans towards Facebook, tends to skew older, whereas Twitter has sort of older white liberals, but also younger Black activists.
Which is a nice confluence, which also explains this huge dominance of ideologically huge bias in a sense. I think it also explains the cozying up that Facebook has done to a lot of Republican donors and activists.
Trump himself. Zuckerberg
this is a business decision more than anything, and it comes from the orientation of the people themselves, in a sense. These are the populations that Facebook is catering to primarily. And in a sense, they feel compelled to give them what they are asking for. And of course, there's a lot of lack of transparency around that. And I think this is what can be problematic from an ethical point of view, but it's not a surprise from a business point of view, from this social media logic, so to say. So I will really keep my last gift very, very short.
I will add to it, though.
Okay, add on.
I will just add one thing, which
this
is...
episode will be the longest in the history of the podcast.
We're coming up on 2.5 hours. I think that'll be the nail in the coffin here. But I would just point that while these platforms are being more fragmented, I just saw the other day that Snapchat will now allow tweets to be formally integrated into the platform. So it's an interesting dynamic to watch moving forward, which is we have a fragmentation of platforms, but we also have cross-platform integration in terms of features.
Exactly.
So if, going back to Nils's question, if there is a breaking of platforms up by the FTC, perhaps we will see platform alliances in terms of the features that are allowed. So right now the model is, okay, Snapchat has stories, Instagram takes them, Facebook takes them, then Twitter takes fleets, and Spotify has stories. Maybe we'll see a more concerted strategy where Twitter, Snapchat, and I don't know, who else? Twitter and Snapchat may start to meld their younger activist audiences and start sharing features that put more weight to Facebook's dominance. That would be an interesting thing to watch. I mean, we see businesses, mergers and acquisitions are huge in other industries. Yeah. So maybe we'll have a merger and acquisition, not of platforms, but of features and of data sharing.
Interfacing.
Exactly.
But yeah, that was my idea was to focus on the demographics and the political ideologies because of the political orientation of what we were talking about today. But of course, we can see platform differentiation on several other levels as well. But this is not as pointed, I think, in Europe, where this distinction, liberal, conservative, is muddier, basically. But I think there is still, because of demographics, an older population on Facebook, even in Europe, and a more progressively oriented population elsewhere, even though in Europe, this older, conservative, younger, progressive division doesn't really hold. A lot of the conservatives in Poland are actually very young. And it's their parents that are more liberal, which is a very interesting twist. Yes. So that was my third and last gift.
Yes. In a very last
point.
Yes. I'm looking on Twitter here and I see Julian. He asked a question late in the stream, so let's take it. The pandemic has seen the spread of conspiracy theories and far-right messages on social media. In countries like Romania, this resulted in far-right parties winning seats in the parliament. You know something about Romania?
Yes.
What do you think are the long-term effects of these movements that become more visible?
Excellent question. And I think this, I was recently reading in The Economist an article about this where my friend Cristian Norocel was interviewed to actually prime the Economist journalist on the success, the first time actually that a real extremist party got seats in the European Parliament, in the Romanian Parliament. I'm obsessed with the European Parliament, in the Romanian Parliament. This question is very important. Do social media give more visibility to very marginal movements or opinions that otherwise would remain really at the periphery of society and never get any mobilization? So there is this contender success or contender competitive advantage theory that has been really quite a lot explored in the world of social media and politics.
There's been some really good research done testing these claims empirically. This year, I want to say these papers are coming out on testing the challenger
hypothesis,
incumbent hypothesis.
Also connected with this normalization, equalization hypothesis that goes back to the very, very beginning of social media studies. So this question is very pertinent. In the case of Romania, I really actually don't know very much about the social media landscape there. But if I am to compare to other markets for this particular type of extremist messages, I think there is a social media effect. This particular party in Romania probably would not have obtained that much visibility outside these alternative media channels, but it is difficult to think that it is because of social media that they managed to overpass the threshold of, I think, 5%. That is quite high for the Romanian parliament. It is a combination of things that has to do with disappointment in politics, the fomenting of nationalist identity, and quarrels within that field by other parties. But in a way, the search for a new outlet for expressing a very nationalist approach, but not being into the same pool of corrupted old politicians. So it's a combination of social factors combined with social media visibility that probably can explain, at least to some extent, our win, and probably some more details that I ignore in terms of who sponsored their campaigns, who was promoting their message, who was their main front person, and so on, which are aspects I'm not familiar with.
And I would only add how much fried chicken was given out. I do know there was a controversy a few years ago with Romanian politicians giving out fried chickens at the polls, which has nothing to do with their long-term staying power, unless there is a long supply line of fried chicken, which is tough to do in a pandemic.
It's tough to do in a pandemic, for sure.
This has been fun. I don't know if we monitored all of the streams in the best way, but now that we have this sort of technology to do this, maybe we should do like a non-podcast Q&A at some point next year. I think it's a fun format.
It's a fun
I enjoy
format.
doing it, and we'll see what happens. I think with these big court battles, the court battles to come, and the regulation is we're going to see some shaking and moving in 2021.
Yeah.
Not so much in terms of politics. I don't know of any like major elections. In terms of European elections and American elections, I can't think of anything huge happening next year, but I think it's going to be a lot of shakeups.
Now is the time to make those changes.
Now's the time to make the moves. The court orders are out, and we'll see what happens.
And maybe you should have on the podcast somebody who really can go down into the details of the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act.
Oh, yeah, but I don't know. When I hear legal language, legalese.
Well, somebody who knows how to speak normal and read the legal aspects.
So I will say for those marathon listeners, maybe if this only enters your subconscious as you're sleeping, I do have the plan for the next 2 episodes already. We'll have first episode of next year will be Valentine Dupuis, who is the head of communications at the European Green political party, the Euro Party.
Oh, exciting.
So we're going to talk about Euro parties, and which are this like weird beast specific to the European Union.
I definitely will tune in on that one.
And they had some real growth spurts with the latest European elections, and we'll talk to him about some of the challenges that they face in terms of digital communications, with dealing with national, they go through national parties, but they don't really have voters themselves, so that's interesting. And then we'll talk to Nick, I think his last name is Ahmed, who is a data scientist doing field experiments at Priorities USA, where I'm going to hammer him on questions about mobilization, the methodologies behind running experiments for political ads, all that stuff I talked about. We're going to get in a much deeper depth going forward. So that's the program for January. I don't know what next year will hold. It's always a surprise.
Well, let's hope it will be better than 2020.
Yes, at least
health-wise for the planet.
But thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for listening if you've made it this far. And Merry Christmas, I think is what we'll end with, or Happy Holidays.
Happy holidays and Happy New Year.
I've just been speaking with Dr. Anamaria Dutceac-Segesten, Associate Professor of Strategic Communication at Lund University. And that's a wrap for the 5th annual Social Media and Politics Year in Review. Thank you so much for tuning in, especially if you've made it this far. You can check the episode description and get links to all the different platform Year in Review stats, as well as some supplementary material for this episode. We'll see what 2021 brings, but until then, I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Alma. See you next year.
I didn't think it would be so long. So